YouTube is filtering out the racism. Well, that's good. I'm glad they're doing that for us, so we don't have to worry about it. Yes, we're going to be talking about Song of the South today, which is a very controversial film, and we'll get all into it.
We sure will.
Um,
Jen is asking if I sang along to my sing along tape. Along, yes. Singing is questionable. That's
Yeah, so this movie I didn't know until we saw it because, this movie is hard to find unless you had that sing-along tape. This movie has never been available for home video release aside from the one song featured on the aforementioned sing-along tape that they released in the 80s. So this is my first time seeing it in preparation for this stream, and I was like, "Oh, this movie is mostly live action." I didn't realize that. It's a bit like Mary Poppins in that way, but nonetheless, we're going to talk about it anyway because there's a few reasons we're going to talk about it. One is that it helped save Disney Studios during a troublesome post-war time, a turbulent post-war era. And
yeah.
another is because of its controversy in history, and we're going to sort of look into, well, is the film as racist as everyone thinks it is? There's going to
Yeah.
be a lot to say about that.
Oh, there sure
Um,
is.
Yes, this is a movie, I've mentioned it before, you can't find on Disney Plus. They've basically disowned it. We watched it on archive.org. I
Yeah,
put a
it is
link
available for
earlier.
free download, actually, a 4K
Mm,
fan restoration in 4K, because it has never been released on home video, so it's quite difficult to come by any footage of it that
hmm.
is, mildly watchable, I would say. A lot of it
Yeah,
is incredibly low resolution, but some
yeah,
enterprising fan took it upon themselves to essentially just toss that shit in DaVinci Resolve or Premiere and polish it up a little bit. And very grateful to him. He didn't do the best job. There are certain scenes that really kind of show the amateurish nature of it. There's bad color balance from shot to shot in a couple
yeah.
of bits on that Internet Archive version, but it is the most reliable way to find it and watch it. And I guess I'll just sort of jump right into my opinion on this movie. I think it's worth watching, actually. I think it's definitely worth a view. Maybe not great. I don't know if I would consider it a great film overall, but I think it is something that you should definitely check it out and make up your own mind about it. And I think you might come to vastly different conclusions than the common narrative peddled about this movie.
Yeah. Yeah, I say we just jump into it. I feel similarly. I've looked into a lot of the criticism levied against this movie and the history thereof, and the book it was based on. Hugh has read some of it, as he likes to do. We appreciate him for that because I don't feel like doing that all the time. But we looked into the criticisms levied at the movie. I think a lot of them are quite bogus. We'll talk all about it. But as has been mentioned in the chat, this movie has been controversial for a while. There were criticisms of it at the time. Um, and I suppose the amount of critics has outweighed the amount of fans over time, such that now they've completely disowned it. They've redone so the Splash Mountain ride at Disney was themed from Song of the South. It has Brer Rabbit and Brer Fox and all those characters. They've redone that ride and reskinned it essentially to be oh God, what's the name of the movie? Why am I blanking on it? The Princess and the Frog. They have
Yes.
rethemed Splash Mountain as a result. So clearly, Disney believes that this movie is just too controversial to touch anymore. And I, for the life of me, don't fully understand why. Like you mentioned, I think the movie itself is okay. It's not amazing. I think the live action segments are far weaker than the animated segments. And, there were criticisms like that at the time as well, and those are ones I definitely agree with. But it's not as charming as some of Disney's other previous movies that we've covered on the channel, precisely because they focus so much on the live action stuff, and it's just not quite as charming and fun and well made as the animated sections are. But I really don't for the life of me understand why this movie is as controversial as it is. There are certain criticisms I understand, and we'll talk about them, but people act like this movie is toxic, essentially, and I don't for the life of me understand why. Before we jump into any of the specifics, I want to respond to a couple super chats. Joe Danger 37 says Birth of a Nation next. Yeah, see, that's the thing. Birth of a Nation is a movie about how the KKK are the good guys, actually. I understand why
Yeah,
that's
that one I
controversial.
get. That one I understand the controversy. Controversial at the time too, as well. By the
Yes.
way,
Yeah.
much
This,
similar in a similar vein to this. Honestly, controversial with the people watching it at the time. This though, kind of like not even close to a Birth of the Nation.
no.
Not
No,
even close.
not even close. As Trevor Tiger points out, thank you very much for the super chat. Trevor says, "It's great seeing more discussion about this movie. I did my own video covering the absolute bonkers backstory of Song of the South and the rides it spawned. People vastly overblow its negatives." I absolutely agree.
Me
I
too.
think the criticism is way overblown, and sometimes it's just actually factually inaccurate, as we'll get into. It's funny because remember in Fantasia, we talked about it. In Fantasia, there's actual minstrel show blackface for one of the, are they fawns or centaurs, whatever they are?
Yeah, the
I think they're
sunflower
centaurs.
centaur.
Like like buck teeth and the
Birth of a
hair.
Nation pickaninny blackface.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like actually horribly offensive minstrel show blackface, and she's literally shining the hooves of one of the prettier white centaurs. And it's like, yikes, Doc, that's not great. It is like a 5-second clip of Fantasia, but
That
that's
they
like
don't
actually
include in the
offensive.
Disney Plus version. Actually, they
No.
trim that out.
Yeah,
Even
I can
they,
understand
yeah.
why.
Oh yeah. Uh,
Yeah. So, and as we've mentioned, other places, they have what's it called? A disclaimer in front of that movie saying that, like, oh, we understand that this has some offensive caricatures of different cultures, but we're going to leave it up for, historical commentary. People can make up their own minds and just sort of, we don't want to erase the past. But then they literally erase the most offensive part,
yeah.
which, I feel like you should just pick one or the other instead of lying about it. But that's Disney's MO for you. This movie, on the other hand, has nothing that offensive, even a little bit, as
No.
far as I'm concerned. And we'll talk all about it, but I think this movie is incredibly overhated. I think it's just an okay, fine movie with some great songs and some really, there's a lot to be said in the pros for this movie.
But it
The
also
pro.
this is 1946, and we're talking a very wholesome black lead in a film. Uh,
Mhm.
I would say that would probably upset the hardcore racists, the actual racists, a lot more than any of the depictions that they're showing. Um,
I agree.
you know,
Topaz Dude asks, "Do you think that scene from Fantasia should be cut from Disney Plus?" I would, if it were me, I would cut that scene, but I would also not have the disclaimer that says we're gonna leave it up to start a conversation, blah blah blah. Like you can't
you
have it
can't
both
really do
ways.
both. Yeah.
It's such a, and they don't cut it, they crop it out. They just zoom in slightly to so you can't see that part. And I'm fine with getting rid of it. That's fine.
Yeah.
Maybe you leave it up, or if you put the disclaimer in front and you leave it as is. But I can understand getting rid of that. There's nothing to say about it other than the fact that it's deliberately caricatures of black people for the sake of humor.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like an actual minstrel show.
This one they actually took in the pre-production stages. They actually took significant steps to attempt to avoid any minstrel show connotations that it might have, which is sort of how you end up with the characterizations that we see,
Mhm.
which I would argue much more wholesome and positive overall. Actually, overwhelmingly over wholesome and positive comparatively. So there are a couple questions or a couple things that I wanted to refer to in the chat real quick before we get started on the movie that involve the book. Um, Poison Ivy Rorschach says, I would love if the whole movie was just Brer Rabbit's adventure as told by Uncle Remus, and Wasserman is talking about, is it based on Joel Harris's books? I loved them as a child. We GAD LP in USSR. Yeah, so it is based on the Uncle Remus tales by Joel Chandler Harris, which were very popular newspaper stories that were then published into essentially like a documentation of African American folklore done by a journalist for the Atlanta Constitution newspaper in Reconstruction era Georgia. And the book is 64 stories long. the complete tales. There are 64 stories, and there are 3 of them adapted into this film version, which
Hmm.
I think, like we were saying, the animated bits that are the Adventures of Brer Rabbit are the strongest part, and we'll definitely get into why that is, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would highly recommend, if you can, if you're in a place, like if you're south of the Mason-Dixon line, this will be in the
Well,
United States, this might be a lot easier to do. But I would
I'm sure
highly
you can find
recommend.
it online. I'm sure you can find them on
Oh yeah, you
Amazon.
can find them on Amazon, but like if you can go and get these, quite cheap at used bookstores, and they're very often, kind of beloved copies, and they're really gorgeous old books, and they're kind of everywhere, especially in southern states. I've never quite run into them too much more in growing up in a state that actually won something, but that's I would recommend checking them out because I think they're very good.
Yeah. And well, yeah, so the interesting thing to learn about the Joel Chandler Harris's Uncle Remus stories is that he didn't author them. They're a collection of stories that he recorded from, the African Americans of rural Georgia post Civil War. And they're a bit more like the Grimm's brothers fairy tales in that they're recorded folklore stories. And a lot of people have often noted that the Uncle Remus stories are really the only written accounts of a lot of these folk tales that probably would never have been written down otherwise. So they have immense sort of cultural value in that regard as well. The interesting thing about the Uncle Remus stories is that and this will become relevant to one of the main criticisms often levied at this film, in terms of how the black characters speak. Um, Now, these stories were recorded by Harris at the time in 1870s rural
Yes.
Georgia, and he recorded them in the dialect in which they were spoken, and he wrote them such that they look like the dialect is spoken. Is there a better term for that? You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, it's essentially like for fidelity to the oral tradition, right? Like he's trying
Yes.
to preserve as much of the oral tradition of these stories as he can while
Hmm.
writing them in a readable way for a wide audience, right? And
Yeah. So
he's
they are
doing
not
this.
written in quote unquote proper English.
Yes.
They're written how the African American Southern dialect of the time sounded, right?
Yes.
And so when we get to this movie and they speak that way, a lot of people think, oh, that these are stereotypes of the way they talked. And I'm just like, I'm not convinced of that at all. First of all, because these are actual accounts of the actual stories from the 1870s, and I have a hard time believing that they didn't have quite thick accents back then. You know what I mean?
Yeah. But I mean, like we were saying at one point earlier, it's almost as if a group of Africans who have one particular kind of extremely focused on like tonal change language is speaking a foreign language, like English with a southern
Hmm.
accent. It very much comes across like that,
Yeah.
and that feels accurate to the people who were telling Joel Chandler Harris these stories that he was recording. Which this is another thing that, like, common sense would tell you this, but it's also nice to point out he did not have access to recording technology, so most of this was done either directly as things were being spoken to him or from memory as best he could later on. So
Yeah.
a lot of these things are, it's incredibly impressive what he was able to accomplish for this
Yeah.
story, and it is something that is worth talking about. There's a good chance that none of these folklore traditions ever would have been recorded if he had not taken it upon himself to go and do it, because
Yeah.
there weren't that many people interested in doing that at the
No,
time.
and he himself was very much interested in trying to, in his own way, move towards a sort of like post-racial South going forward. And so he was very interested in bringing the sort of cultural tradition that he observed in these places to a wider audience. And they were incredibly beloved, especially in the South, but across the country, and even, as someone mentioned earlier, across the world. Partly because the stories are really good. Like they're really well crafted, very interesting, like trickster tales often. Like Brer Rabbit is the central character of most of them, but definitely the three told it for the sake of this movie. And they're really good. Like I really like them. That's why they're my favorite parts of the movie. Someone mentioned earlier that they would prefer one big story about Brer Rabbit, possibly with a couple of different tales of his strung together and really just to focus on that. We'll talk about the choice they made to include a sort of live action story of a child and how it threads those stories together. It's interesting,
It's
but
in there
I'm
in the
most
books a little bit because it's recorded like so the way it works is basically like the structure of the book is Uncle Remus is telling a child the stories and the
mhm,
child has to keep asking him like basically keep coming back to ask him and like kind of worm some of the stories out of him because he's a good storyteller who knows how to hide things and
yeah.
like all that kind of stuff. So it like there's a lot of really interesting story structure, very unique story structure that makes its way into the way that they decided to write the screenplay. But they
Yeah.
focus a little bit more on the story of the boy than they do on the tales themselves, which
Mhm.
I think that does make it, gives it a little bit of a weaker, a little weaker of a appeal to me now.
And
But
it's not because I think the bones of the story of the little boy are quite good. I think the execution of those live action segments are a little lacking. They're not as well directed and staged and acted as the animated sections are, and as they're not up to the quality of Disney's previous movies, in my opinion. But I could see if the whole thing
it's
was animated, that could actually be really interesting. If we keep that sort of frame of the little kid, I think animating the whole thing might have been a slight improvement. I think there are merits to the sort of story of the kid that is used as the skeleton to hang all these folk tales on. I think like I have a theory about what Disney was going for essentially and why he felt it important. So we'll talk all about that.
yeah. So Topaz Dude brings up another point that I wanted to mention in particular. Another criticism that since the time of release has been sort of levied at the movie is that it is a quote essentially a nostalgic valentine to a past that never existed, and within those limits, it offers a pleasant family diversion for holiday afternoons. So that is a criticism that I think is a lot fairer when directed at the book than it is when directed at the movie, although I do understand how it's directed at the movie. So
mhm.
in the book, as far as I am aware, I haven't made it to this point yet, but people say this happened, that this happens. Uncle Remus is rather nostalgic for his life as a slave in Reconstruction era Georgia. He does not want to move to the rapidly industrializing city of Atlanta and give up his agrarian sensibilities. He prefers to stay where he is on the plantation and
The sharecropper, yeah.
yeah, as a sharecropper. And so this, I think, like one of the things that did in in the book, that sort of undercurrent that's present in the book, is it kind of gave Southerners at the time a way to soften the blow of defeat, you could say. They
Mhm.
sort of desperately needed to believe that that was a possibility at the time, in order to kind of move forward, I think. But I don't think that's as present in the movie as
Well,
folks tend to make it sound. I
it's
like,
not present in the
yeah,
movie, like, period. That's the really interesting thing about it, because I know you talked about in the introduction to the Uncle Remus books, it's framed a bit more like lamenting at the like change in lifestyle that comes with industrialization, like the very rapid industrialization that happens post Civil War, less so than longing to actually just be a slave. You know what I mean? Like he doesn't want to lose his sort of like agrarian farm
values and
country
yeah,
life and values and stuff like that. So I like obviously that sort of rubs people the wrong way to a degree, and it's not hard to understand why it might.
yeah.
And that's sort of Topaz Dude mentioned some of the eye rolling things, rose tinted glasses about how Uncle Remus looks at pre Reconstruction era times. It's not impossible to believe that a character might feel that way, or a person might feel that way at the time, but that's not in the movie.
No,
he's never talking about, oh, that's just not that's not an undercurrent in the movie at all. And I've seen that criticism levied at the movie, and it's like, oh, did you not watch it? Because that's not there. 'Cause I
Yeah.
saw some. I was looking. I was desperate to try to figure out what all the fuss was about this movie, and looked at all the different criticisms I could find. And one of them was that the movie romantic, like that Uncle Remus talks about how things weren't so bad when he was a slave. And I watched the movie twice. I'm like, no, no,
No, he doesn't.
he never mentions that.
And the points. So in the chat, someone mentioned that Uncle Remus talks about old times, but the only points in the movie really where he talks about old times are when he's telling the story. The stories of Brer Rabbit and his adventures, and it's giving very much like Once Upon a Time energy, not
Yeah.
like, oh yeah, back
Mhm.
like 50 years ago, back when we were all slaves and everything was fine. This was
No,
happening. It's not.
just
It's really not
no.
that. It's like, oh, long, long time ago.
Before your time,
Before
before
your
my
time, before
time.
my time.
Yeah.
This trickster rabbit was, active out there. Like it's very much a fairy tale, and I don't think that it's fair to say that he's
No,
like looking back at like slave tie like that
no,
yeah,
not in the movie anyway.
no.
I have not read the whole book. I have heard that there's a little bit of that in the book, and it's sort of fuzzy on whether it's more about, you know, not liking the rapid industrialization that's happening and longing for the old school, like, agrarian lifestyle, or whether it's more sort of whitewashing and looking back at slavery with rose-tinted glasses. Can't say myself, but it's not in the movie. That's for damn sure. And the movie is more controversial than those books, which is very strange to
Yeah,
me.
it's very odd. Lord Wahoo's this was a movie that tried to help race relationships by showing that they are people too. Funny how it's become the epitome of Walt was racist. So it is kind of funny to me that this has become like the example held up that like Disney is racially, like at best racially insensitive, and at worst, screaming racists who, made money off of white people, and pushing white values. James Baskett, who plays Uncle Remus in this film, Walt Disney and him, excuse me, became very close friends throughout the remainder of James Baskett's life. He passed away not too long after the film, which is, a tragedy, because he's quite good in it. Walt Disney even would go around telling people James Baskett was the greatest actor he had ever met, probably because he's doing this, like, kind of carrying the blended live action sequences with the animation by himself with very little, technology and technological help. Maybe not doing it quite so well as others in the era, but pretty damn good. And he's given a pretty solid performance. Walt campaigned very hard to get him an Oscar nomination for this film. He
Mhm.
was quite upset that he was not allowed to attend the premiere of his own movie when it came out in Atlanta.
Mhm.
So it is baffling to me that anybody would look at this and conceive of Walt Disney as someone who disliked black people.
Yeah.
It seems very much like you just don't quite understand or know even the story behind it. Um,
Yeah, or the story itself, frankly. I don't think you need to know that he had close personal relationships with a number of the people and was, like the story of him being upset that he wasn't allowed to attend the premiere at the Fox Theater here in Atlanta. You don't need to know any of that to look at the movie and realize that this movie is not making fun of black people. Like, you have to be kind of crazy, I think, to come away with that. So let's talk about some more of those criticisms. For one, you mentioned James Baskett and what's her name?
Hattie
I can't remember.
McDaniel. Yeah,
Hattie McDaniel.
two
Like,
very
go
prominent
ahead.
voices who were not offended by the film were the two main black characters who appear in it, Hattie McDaniel and James Baskett. I think, respectively, the first two African American actors to receive Academy Awards. I think they
Hmm.
both were. Neither of them were offended by the film, and they even said, out loud in public to many people, if we had felt that this movie was offensive, we would not have agreed to be part of it.
Yeah,
And then sort of just washed their hands of it, which, good for them, honestly.
yeah.
But yeah, that
So I want to talk about one of the other major criticisms that is levied at this. Like, as has been mentioned before, this is not just a movie that, woke people in 2014 on have lambasted. This is a movie that was controversial even at the time. But I think those criticisms back then were also mostly stupid. So one prominent one that's often cited is I believe it was the head of the NAACP or someone very much involved with NAACP at the time wrote, "The National Association for the Advancement of Colored People recognizes in Song of the South remarkable artistic merit in the music and in the combination of living actors and the cartoon technique. It regrets, however, that in an effort neither to offend audiences in the North or South, the production helps to perpetuate a dangerously glorified picture of slavery. Making use of the beautiful Uncle Remus folklore, Song of the South unfortunately gives the impression of an idyllic master-slave relationship with which is a distortion of the facts." Here's the thing: there is no slavery in the movie. These
They're
are
not
not slaves.
slaves.
These are sharecroppers in 1870s, roughly, Georgia. These aren't slaves. So they were just wrong about the movie, like about the facts of the movie. Like not as a matter of opinion, they just didn't understand it, which is interesting because the movie doesn't start with a date or anything like, oh, 1870, whatever town in rural Georgia. So I can understand being a little confused at first as like whether these are sharecroppers post Civil War, or whether these are slaves. But if you watch the movie, there's more than enough information for you to conclude that these aren't slaves. For example, that Uncle Remus is allowed to just leave at one point in the movie. He's
Yeah.
just like, I think I'm going to move to Atlanta. I'm going to get out of here.
Yeah.
And
He's
then
like, "Oh,
there's
I guess there's no use for me anymore. I'm gonna move." I don't think slaves could do that, like on their own free will.
no,
Call me. I'm not particularly read up on the rules governing slavery because I'm not all that interested in taking them myself. But yeah, no, I don't think they were. I don't think they were allowed.
yeah, it's no, it's quite obvious that they're not slaves.
They're depicted more as just neighbors. Like
Yeah, because there's also poor white sharecroppers as well. We'll
yeah,
talk more about them when we get into the story. But they're actually the children of the poor white sharecroppers, two of them at least, are like the primary antagonists of the story, actually. Um, so and also like there's a couple scenes where you see a bunch of the black workers because Uncle Remus is kind of too old to like actually do a lot of the manual labor anymore, but he's still there as sort of a town elder telling stories and blah 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 blah, looking after the children to some degree. But the younger workers that are going around and they're singing their spirituals and things like that, like as they're walking along, like there's a guy on a horse walking with them. That guy's also black. You know what I mean? It's not like an overseer. You know what I mean? It's quite obvious if you look at all the details of the movie. This is not about slavery. So the NAACP would come out and be like, "Oh, it romanticizes slavery," and it's like, "Oh, you just didn't watch it.
yeah.
You just didn't pay attention."
There is
Whoops.
nary a slave
In the
this
whole
film.
movie, yeah. And it's so funny because in that statement they talk about how, oh, the beautiful Uncle Remus folklore that it's been adapted from. It's like, well, in the Uncle Remus books is the only place you get anything that sort of has any sort of anything that could be construed as rose-tinted glasses towards the era of
Yeah.
slavery. Which, like we
So
said,
you
that's
didn't read it. You didn't watch it
yeah.
and you didn't read it. So what are you? You're just kind of complaining into the void.
Grand Darkfang, thank you very much for the super chat. Says it doesn't matter if Walt wasn't racist or if the black actors didn't think it was racist. A bunch of uppity morons that want to perpetuate racial tensions to fill their own pockets from the outrage. That's definitely part of it. I think that's part of why that continues to this day. Obviously, there were some criticisms of the movie coming from people that either just didn't understand the movie or were motivated to dislike it for certain reasons. A lot of the criticisms of the movie relate to the dialect with which the black characters speak. And I'm sorry, but I watched this movie, I'm like, what do you expect them to sound like? These are
They don't
rural
sound.
black farmers in 1870. Do you expect them to sound like Obama? Like, what are you talking about?
They sound
Perfectly believable.
like believable. They like more believable now. Like they're polished in this movie, especially compared to the way they're written in the book. So I'm not sure exactly what what you want. They just sound like Southern black guys. You know, like it's not that crazy.
Yeah, and I don't know, man. It's like I feel like you have to kind of know nothing about the Reconstruction era history in America to think that this movie has absolutely no realism to it. Obviously, there's a sort of like there's a folk tale sort of vibe to the whole thing. You know, the people are generally nice. It's a sort of optimistic vision of things. It's not wholly unrealistic. It's not like, oh no, you know, sharecroppers and the plantation owners in 1870s America ever actually had amicable relationships with each other. Like, really? That never once.
Never.
Like like you know, there's a lot of stuff like that, a lot of these criticisms, and it's just like, what are you criticizing here exactly? You know, like I mean, obviously there's a sort of wholesomeness to the movie where the characters are, except for the bully antagonist characters, they're like mostly pretty nice to each other, but there's still conflict, and the conflict makes sense. And you know, like I don't know, this film gets so much hate, and I don't understand it at all. It's crazy.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. I don't get it.
Yes,
I
so
like it's
Poison
certainly
Ivy,
not. Oh, go ahead.
Poison. Sorry, really quick. Poison Ivy Rorschach says even modern day Black Southerners sound similar to this accent sometimes. Yeah, it's. I was joking with you when we were first talking about this off stream. I was like, "Have you guys heard Cam Patterson? What Cam Patterson sounds like?" He's a comedian, kind of up and coming comedian. He has like one of the thickest black accents I've ever heard, and it's like that's how he talks today. If I did like a pitch perfect, accurate impression of Cam Patterson, people would think I was being racist. You know what I mean? It doesn't matter
Yeah,
how accurate it is, because like that's what he sounds like. I don't believe you when you say that no one in this time sounded like this. I don't believe you at all. It seems perfectly believable. It's not, and none of it is done to caricature them either. Maybe you could argue that the accents are a little bit over the top, you know, because we don't exactly have records of exactly what people talked like from then, you know, that sort of thing. Obviously, this is adapted from books that were written to sound like the dialect, right? So there's some, you know, firsthand account or secondhand, whatever, of the time period. But like, even if they're slightly over the top, it's very, very clear that the intent is not to make fun of people. It's just to represent what they talked
yeah.
like,
How
because this is a representation of that culture. Like
well,
that's the whole
and
point.
representation of the culture and the oral tradition is the most important part about it, right? Because it was transmitted. They these are stories that adapted, like very fascinating. Like if we're talking anthropologically, right? Like these adapted from a tradition in Africa that was very heavily reliant on tonal and oral expression. There was not a lot of written language, like they in that era. And this adapts from that to a a very unique folklore shaped by the new environment that they're forced into, right? And it
Hmm.
creates something that is, when you're reading the stories, you can kind of see that they are the basis, or you can see like where the basis for things like blues and jazz music come about. The call and response is very present in a lot of it. There's rhythmic tones and features that are recorded quite well, honestly, for somebody working almost exclusively from just memory and like off the tip of his brain, basically,
Yeah.
right? That you can see where the rhythmic influences come in for jazz music and blues music and everything, and it's just really fascinating to to take a look at it like that, and then to go and say like, oh well, to me it sounds kind of racist. It's like, well, yeah, but that sound is the driving factor of what makes it, like, part of what makes it so unique. So
Hmm.
it kind of, preserving it is, I would argue, just as important as simply writing the stories down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Eric says, I grew up in rural Appalachia. I can and have sounded like this myself. Yeah. I mean, like it's crazy. Those criticisms are baffling to me. And that's how, when you really dig into a lot of these criticisms, that's how they all feel. It's just like, really?
Yeah.
Like that's it's crazy. Anyway, let's talk about the story. So we mentioned that there are three Brer Rabbit tales told by Uncle Remus in the story, but the sort of frame narrative, the skeleton of the story, is about a kid his family, his dad and his mother, ride from Atlanta by carriage to a remote or rural town in Atlanta where his dad's mother owns a plantation. And they're going to stay there for the summer. And the kid's like, why isn't grandma coming to visit us? Why are we going to her? And they're like, oh, we thought it might be nice to see, to visit her for once and see where your dad grew up and all that sort of stuff. And then it becomes clear there is a sort of tension in the marriage between his mother and his father. His dad is not staying with them
Yes.
in the plantation town, and he's going back to Atlanta to do nebulous,
Newspapery
newspaper work.
things. Yeah.
Yeah,
People
and
don't like what they're reading in the newspapers, so there's some danger present there. There seems to be some tension in whether or not they're ever going to see him again. That's pretty much all we're going to get for why he's not present for the movie.
No, there's the very clear implication, however, that there is tension in their marriage, that things are not going well. There's the implication that his dad's not going to be with them for a while. So I don't know if there's like they're going to get a divorce or they're going to separate and not ever officially get a divorce for like, for the sake of their reputations. It's not really clear what's happening exactly, but his dad is now out of the picture. And so this is troubling to the young kid, as you might imagine. Like when his dad goes to leave, he like cries and he goes and runs after him, begging him to stay, and it doesn't work. So basically, we have the problem for the kid. The kid is his parents' marriage is breaking up, and he's stuck in this new place, this like where he doesn't really come from. He comes from the city, and that's very apparent in the way he dresses and talks compared to the other people. Not just the black sharecroppers here, but the white sharecroppers and also his grandmother and the other people that work for the plantation. And so he's stuck in this new place that he's not used to, and he's got to do classic kid things like adjust and make friends and stuff like that. And he gets into a lot of trouble and stuff like that with some of the neighboring bully kids and things like that. And then he looks to Uncle Remus as a sort of fatherly, paternal figure who can offer him wisdom and stuff like that. And
Yeah.
Go
And he
ahead.
meets Uncle Remus by chance because he tries to sneak away in the middle of the night, and Uncle Remus, being the wise old Gandalf like character, sort of sees him hiding there listening to the stories as as kids do. They get fascinated by these tales of these little animal stories. And Uncle Remus kind of covers for him a little bit and talk in what is probably one of my favorite scenes of the live action part is when he comes in and sort of talks him out of leaving essentially by playing along, right? Like doing that old man tricky thing that people do, right? We're rolling with the trickster tale right from the get-go when we meet Uncle Remus. And
Hmm.
I like it. I like it a lot.
Yeah.
I love a good trickster tale.
And
And
that's the sort of core of this movie and the
yeah,
Brer Rabbit tale specifically. Trayvon Washington says that it's pretty clear to him that the dad is going to live as a quote bachelor in the big city, as in like he's gay. That's certainly an interpretation. I don't know if it's abundantly clear that's what's
I
happening.
would have loved if he
It's
talked like a southern dandy instead. He's like, people don't like what they are reading in the newspaper.
That's certainly an interpretation. It's not made explicit either way what the problem is with the marriage, or why his dad's leaving him. But obviously, the story's mostly about how it affects the young kid. Now, the young kid is obviously looking for that sort of like paternal influence in his life, and he meets Uncle Remus, and he hears that he's a good storyteller, and so he's like trying to coax stories out of him. And he tells him stories about Brer Rabbit, who is obviously he's a sort of mythical folklore trickster figure. He's always like he's chaotic. He's a little kind of morally ambiguous type character, always finding himself in trouble and finding a way of getting himself out of it. There's obvious like Bugs Bunny feels very much descendant from Brer Rabbit.
Yeah,
Obviously not from this movie because he predates him, I believe,
yeah,
right?
he does. Bugs Bunny, I think, first appeared in the 30s. I want to say. I'm not
But yes,
100% sure.
descendant from the books, very much so. Obviously, he's a trickster rabbit character, and so there's a lot of that energy to him in this movie, and so the kid is really engrossed by these tales, and as he's sort of growing up, and dealing with these, he's like playing pranks. Like there's an African American kid that he's sort of playing around with, and like playing pranks on his mother by like putting a frog or a toad, whatever it is, like
Yeah, he's
in the
got a
house and stuff
bullfrog.
like that.
The kid his little friend brings him a bullfrog because he's like, hey, you're staying for a while. Like, let's make friends. Like, as it's got a very like old timey, So it reminded me a little bit of like To Kill a Mockingbird, like how the kids behave in that, where they're
Yeah,
out catching bullfrogs and just like, roaming around the country doing things that country kids do,
yeah,
playing in streams and pretending to be like we got Tom Sawyer, another, Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn probably would not have existed without the influence of the Uncle Remus tales.
yeah.
That
Mark
is,
Twain
yeah.
was a very, very, very big fan of the Uncle Remus stories. He like absolutely adored them and talked about them a lot. So that,
He
yep.
actually, this is like a fun little tangent. He tried to get Joel Chandler Harris to go with him on a lecture tour around the country. So it would be Mark
Mhm.
Twain, and I think there were a couple of other Southern authors and Joel Chandler Harris. And he was basically like, well, if you do this, like you're going to get paid enough that you could just basically retire and just start writing your books. But Joel Chandler Harris suffered from such bad stage fright that he couldn't even read his own stories aloud to children. Um, Now, maybe he was just afraid of sounding racist when doing the accent. I read a couple of these out loud and felt that myself. I was like, "Oh boy, I don't like this."
Doesn't really feel natural when you do the voice.
No, no, it does not. But he had such bad stage fright that they ended up just calling that whole tour off. But they kept in close contact through the rest of their lives.
A couple things in the chat. One, a couple people have mentioned some variation of this. What are your thoughts on a criticism that Uncle Remus is the magical black trope that modern audiences have a
Like he's a
problem with? Well,
magical Negro? Is that what we're like?
that is,
That
yes,
is,
that is. Well, here's the thing. I find most criticisms of that trope like entirely vacuous. Like they're just, especially when they're levied at people like Scatman Crothers' character in The
oh yeah, in The
Shining.
Shining. Yeah.
It's just like he's one of the most likable characters in the movie. Like, what on earth do you actually like? Okay, obviously the criticism is that that trope happens a lot. That these are characters who are there to just give advice and stuff like that. And it's like, okay, but your criticism is about the abundance of a trope because that criticism can't possibly be an actual argument against any one instance. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like it's a representation thing because like are we literally supposed to believe that you can't have a sort of wiser old black mentor figure in a movie? Like you just can't have that ever? Really?
Yeah.
Why not?
Why
Like
can't
I
we?
don't I just can't especially when Uncle Remus is a great character. He's one of the best characters in the movie,
Yeah.
not just because of his
Uncle
performance,
Remus
but
is a
like,
very like this is kind of a sad thing, right? Like I don't think he is granted his due in the influence that he's had on the culture of America,
yeah,
especially now. I was like I was saying earlier, I was completely unaware that these stories existed until we started doing the research for this book, and
yeah.
I had never heard of them, and going through them, I'm like, these are great actually. Like misgivings about me reading the accent aloud aside, these stories are a lot of fun and they're really interesting and deep and morally gray. Amoral, you could say. Actually,
Yeah.
instead is a better word. But yeah, I like.
So a
I
couple
don't
people
understand the magical Negro criticism levied at
okay.
this character, right? Like this doesn't.
Well, it's not necessarily ever specific to one character, as a couple people have mentioned, and I was about to say as well. The criticism is about like the prevalence of the trope. You know, if the only roles that black men ever get, especially older black men, are just the sort of like helpful, wise person who gives sage advice, but then we never really
Yeah,
tell stories about black people, that's like a societal level criticism, but it's not a criticism that ever really has any weight when levied against one particular movie, unless the whole idea is that it's like completely cliche and just really poorly executed, which is like if someone does the sort of magical black Negro trope and it's just the hackiest, most cliche thing you've ever seen, where it's just poor leftovers of better versions of the trope, then that's one criticism. But then it really, what it comes down to is the execution. If you have a societal level, people confuse societal level criticisms with criticisms of individual pieces of media all the time, and it always frustrates the hell out of me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because they're like, oh, like, if these are the only stories that like black characters get, then that's the criticism, right?
Okay.
Not that
Yeah.
any one particular instance is ever bad for doing it. And when people make that jump, I'm like, oh, you're just not using your brain. Because what is actually wrong with Uncle Remus in this? Nothing. He's a
Nothing.
great character.
He's a really good character, and he's got a lot. Like, I mean, he doesn't only exist to help the main character, but he provides a fatherly figure for him when he needs
Yeah.
one. But then he also has his own struggle later on in the movie, right? Like, he has his own little journey and little dark moment, dark night of the soul kind of thing going on later on in the movie. So it's not like he's just completely without lacking depth. I find that a little
far from it.
Yeah,
far from it. There's more meat on his bones as a character than a lot of other, and I'm not just saying that because he's a bigger guy, than some of the other characters in the movie. Like, he actually gets quite a bit.
Yeah.
I think my favorite scene in the entire movie comes with like Uncle Remus alone, kind of talking out loud to himself, the sort of dark night of the soul that Uncle Remus gets. I think that's the kind of real heart of the movie. And we'll talk about it when we get to it.
Yeah.
But yeah,
God, somebody in the chat mentioned the Bechdel test. Don't even get me started.
Yeah, the Bechdel test is an even lazier version of that type of criticism.
Yeah.
Anyway, so yeah, Uncle Remus, he tells them some trickster stories of Brer Rabbit, and of course, young Johnny is very taken by these stories, as a child might be, and so then he sort of is so I think what Disney is trying to do with this frame story about the kid is he's making a movie about the importance of folk tales rather than just making an adaptation of the Brer Rabbit folk tales. So it's very much a story about why folk tales are important, especially to children, and especially to children dealing with big problems in their life. That's what the movie is about. And so that's why that whole through line is there.
Yes.
Because he's a young kid, he's growing up, his father's not around, and he's not really sure what to do with himself and like what his identity is and like who like this new surroundings he's found himself in, like how to adapt to them. And then a wiser older man tells him these old stories that give him a sort of grasp of like how one can be the positive trickster character, how one can embody the sort of youthful, chaotic, playful, adventurous energy and be good about it. And a lot of the stories, as mentioned, a lot of the Brer Rabbit stories in this are more specifically about how to act to get out of problems, right? Like Brer Rabbit stumbles his way into some bad situation and has to figure out how to be smart and clever to get out of it. So, like, obviously, trickster tales can have more to them than that. They can be more active in terms of like causing problems themselves, but that's like those are the stories that he's telling him, and the stories he's telling them are about like how to deal with problems and how to be clever. And like, because some of the problems he's dealing with are obviously like his dad leaving. Obviously, that's one of them. The other big one is the bully kids and how to deal with them and how to outsmart them. That one obviously has like a direct one-to-one sort of relationship with Brer Fox and Brer Bear. And so, this is a movie about the importance of folk stories. And I think I mentioned it before, but Uncle Remus has this moment that comes later in the movie. I'm just going to jump ahead, where the mother views what's happening with the kid, acting out, getting into trouble, and all sorts of things as the result of his influence, of the result of Uncle Remus's influence. And he's like, stop telling him these stories. You know what I mean? He doesn't need to hear that. I don't want you hanging out with him anymore. Because she thinks, though she doesn't know anything about all the sort of details of what's happening She thinks Uncle Remus is a bad influence on him. And then Uncle Remus starts to sort of wonder if maybe he is, right? And there's this great scene later in the movie where after he's told that he can't see Johnny anymore, he's like he's talking to himself and he's like these stories have never done anyone harm. Like he's like just trying to figure out, and he says, and if they don't do no good, how come they last so long? And I think
Yeah, I
that's
think
the
that's
heart
the
of the
heart.
movie.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely the
That
heart of the movie right there.
yeah. It's a movie about the importance of folk tales. And the conflict centers kind of on whether they're important or not, whether people dismiss because he's telling little Johnny a bunch of stories about a chaotic trickster figure, and the mom is like, well, he's getting into trouble. Clearly, this is bad for him. You know what I mean? But it's like, no, this is actually, they work in sort of mysterious ways, if you will. And so eventually, though I think it could have been slightly better executed, the central idea of the movie is that, like, hearing these trickster stories helps him become a better person and helps him learn how to deal with the problems in his life. And eventually that results in the sort of reunification of his family and the sort of like he finds his place in this new environment because they stay
Yeah,
ultimately in the rural area as well. So like that's the sort of core arc of the movie, and that's why there's these live action sections that feature this kid, and why the whole movie isn't just about Brer Rabbit. I think it's really interesting. I think it could have been slightly better executed, but I definitely see what they were going for, and I like what they're going for. I think there's something really interesting to be said about it.
yeah, no, I think so, and I think it's also so the reason, because we had discussed while we were discovering it, that it's not very animated, right? Like it's only
Hmm.
maybe a third of it is animated at
Yeah,
most. So it's not
yeah,
there's really not a lot of animation. It is considered a half or like a live action slash animated feature, but I think that it is important to talk about in the continuation of the Disney arc, because in a lot of ways it feels like Walt Disney sort of, especially after a low point for the studio, and like a change in direction. Bambi underperformed, and the war kind of it put him in the position of having to do a lot of other things that maybe had him questioning these decisions about like, where am I going to be going now that the war is over? This is the first one that came out immediately post war. Um, this probably had him questioning a lot about what had him at a moment where he was questioning the direction that his studio was going to take. And I think it's important that the next few after this are all right back to the well of the Grimm's fairy tales, or these sort of folktale-ish magical fantasy type stories like Alice
yeah.
in Wonderland and Cinderella and
Sleeping Beauty,
Sleeping
which is
Beauty,
Briar Rose, I believe is the name
Briar
of the
Rose.
Grimm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So um, yeah, I think that this is it's an important one for where the studio goes afterward, and the success of it clearly kind of showed him that other people feel that folk tales are also important, and
Mhm.
that launches it's called the Silver Age by these arbitrary whoever decided to put this up on Wikipedia, right? They're calling this the Silver Age. I would argue maybe actually the Golden Age of Disney, while where they're just like clapping out hit after hit after hit. So
Yeah.
yeah, but this is sort of the launching pad for that, and sort of describes where the studio is going to take its artistic endeavors moving forward. Um,
Yeah. I think it's really interesting. So Trayvon Washington says these stories never did no harm. That's why they last so long. A bit on the nose, isn't it? I disagree. First of all, the wording is slightly different, and the way it's worded is important. But this is a person who is being told that his stories are having a bad influence on a kid. And so all he really has is his stories because he's too old to work anymore. He just kind of hangs around and he's the sort of keeper of their sort of folklore oral tradition and the teller of these stories, and he's being told that these stories aren't good for the kids, and so he's having this little moment of doubt. That's all it really is. He's just like he's telling himself like these stories have never hurt anyone. And then his sort of rationale for like it's not just these stories never hurt nobody. It's also and if they don't do no good, how come they last so long? So like and I think there's it can be hard to articulate in a sort of provable, demonstrable way exactly why these stories are good and important in a provable sort of scientific way. It's not exactly something that you can prove like that. But the idea that like, well, if they didn't do anyone good, why would we still remember them? Why would we keep telling them? I think that's actually really good. I wouldn't describe that as on the nose. I mean, I think it's
But
obvious.
he clarified here that he means on the nose relative to the situation with the movie
Oh,
as it is today.
oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yes. So I think it's ironic that he's like, well, this story never did anyone like any harm, and it's like, well, if they didn't do any good, why? How come they last so long? And Disney's like, well, we put an end to that. These stories are dead in the culture now, and it's like, damn, that really sucks, actually. You know what I mean? It is kind of crazy to just throw this movie away wholesale and all reference to it and all the sort of cultural sort of
Yeah.
to ignore how influential it was, not just the movie, but the book on Southern American and American culture in general, to just throw all that out the window because you're a little uncomfortable because some people erroneously think the movie is making fun of black people. Like they're wrong to think that, but
Yeah.
that's enough for Disney to be like, well, I guess we won't show it anymore, and you can't even buy it from us. Like that's kind of sad, actually, especially given the sort of thematic core of the movie. But
Oh.
I
Yeah.
think that's a shame.
So there's also a comment in the chat. I've seen it a couple times now. Is the film choice related to the month?
No, not
Not
directly.
directly,
Just
but
sort of
I'll leave
happened
that.
like
Yeah,
that.
it kind of fell into place perfectly.
It is kind of deeply ironic to me that this movie that actually is a sort of pretty interesting time capsule of Black American history and culture has been thrown out by people who are afraid of accusations of racism. You know what I mean? It's just like,
Yeah.
oh, I guess we'll just throw it out then, huh? You know what I mean? Like the Uncle Remus stories, despite any sort of warts they may have, any sort of potential nuances lost over time and in translation, whatever you might say is hypothetically possible, are nonetheless a sort of like the Grimm's brothers fairy tales of African American folklore. And it's like, well, why don't we all know them? Or I mean, not everyone in the world ought to, obviously, but like, why aren't they more popular? Why aren't they still taught? Why aren't movies being made out of them?
So Wasserman's asking, do the books have the same negative connotation now, as the movie? And I wouldn't say that they have the same negative connotation. I would say that they're just practically unknown in modern dialogue. It's something that you kind of have to like I was saying. Neither of us were aware of these before we started researching this film. Is that correct, Jamie?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Never heard of them.
Yeah, and I don't know if that's simply because we grew up in a more northern geared area. I don't know how like because when I went to find it at the used bookstore in Old Town Fredericksburg, Virginia, which has a big Confederate cemetery at one end of town. I asked about it, and instantly the people at the desk were like, "Oh yeah, I saw a copy of that upstairs," as like something that they had recently encountered, right?
Hmm.
And it was like, oh, okay. And when I came down and they were like, oh my God, I'm so glad you found it. Wow. Yeah. Like they seemed to know what it is, and to have
Hmm.
sort of like fond memories of it. But
Yeah,
I have never heard of it. And I would almost bet that if I asked, and pretty much anybody I grew up with, they also would never have known that
yeah.
this was a thing. So
I get the vibe that people our age or this generation, whatever you want to say, if they grew up anywhere other than the American South, they probably never heard of it. And if they grew up in the American South, maybe they heard of it when they was a kid. They were a kid and had fond memories of it, but it's not something that's being carried forth anymore. It's like we're still in a sort of generation because it was incredibly popular for a time. and now we're sort of at the point where like only people in the region seem to like remember it, remember having fond memories of it, but they're not exactly like passing it on. Obviously there'll be some exceptions, but that's what it seems like to me, and I think it's probably in danger of disappearing almost completely, I would say. And regarding whether the book is as hated as the movie, definitely not. The movie is where all the hate is directed, even though I think it deserves none of it, or basically none of it.
Yeah. I told one of my coworkers that I was going to be watching it this weekend, and he grew up in Atlanta, and his instant response as soon as I said, "Oh, I'm going to be watching Song of the South," he goes, "Oh, Jesus Christ," in that exact tone, right? As if it was like, "Oh
Yeah.
my God, why would you do
Like
that to
it's
yourself?"
like it's Birth of a Nation or worse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I'm watching The Triumph of the Will or something like that,
Yeah.
and just talking about that in the office, which is nuts because it's
Yeah.
nowhere close. it's
No.
it's wild.
As I can't pronounce your name, but it says in the chat, I'm from PA and my mom loved singing Zip-a-dee-doo-dah. My mom would sing that to me as a kid as well. We're from Maryland, and so like the song definitely has lasting power because oh my God, it's such a catchy song. you know, like
Yeah.
it's a banger. It's incredibly catchy. It shows up a couple times in this movie,
Won an
and
Oscar.
it was written for this movie. Um, and it's a very, very good song. But I think a lot of people have forgotten that that's where this comes from, or if they do, they're like, well, at least that song is good, But like that song's reputation has been tainted by the criticisms of this movie, most of which I think are bogus.
Well, any criticisms of the song are also kind of bogus because, like, if we were gonna, oh wow, he's idolizing slavery. First of all, we've already talked about how that's not what's going on. But second of all, what he's saying is, oh, it's one of those zip-a-dee-doo-dah days where everything it seems like it's going right. Like it's
Mhm.
just a good day. It's like, are you really telling me that these sharecroppers in Georgia didn't have good days? Like, is that what you're trying to say? That they never had a day they enjoyed once in their life?
Mhm.
Actually, you know what? Now that I think about it, this
That is
that's
probably what they're
probably
saying.
what they are saying. That like everything should be and is black pain, and we shouldn't take any merit from anything that shows anything other.
I
Probably.
mean, that seems to be the attitude, and I think it's kind of ironic that as a result of that, we're erasing a lot of Black American culture in the
Yeah.
process. That's nuts. That's crazy. Yeah, the song is still on Best of Disney albums. I think recently, within the past 10 years or so, Disney's like removed all references to it in their parks because it used to be on circulation. Like they just sometimes they just play some of the best songs from their movies just at certain areas of the park over speakers and stuff like that. And they removed it from the playlist. And it's like there's literally nothing racist in the song.
It's
There's no third verse where he talks about how actually being a slave wasn't so bad. Like that just doesn't happen. It's just about how today is a wonderful day, and it's the kind of day that makes you want to sing a song. Wonderful feelings coming my way, all that sort of stuff. It's just a happy, fun song,
yeah,
and
about
it's
being happy and having a fun time.
and it's very catchy. Like
Yeah.
why? Ugh, it's crazy. It's crazy.
Yeah.
And obviously, the Jen has mentioned in chat because she's from Florida and they would go to Disney all the time. Splash Mountain, one of the more popular rides, and that was all themed based on the Brer Rabbit characters. And I think the general arc of Splash Mountain, if I'm not mistaken, is Brer Rabbit running away from Brer Bear and Brer Fox.
Yeah.
I think that's the general arc of the narrative of the ride. You know, and people love Splash Mountain.
Yeah, yeah. The people were upset by the takeover of Tiana's Bayou adventure. But what can you do?
Yeah,
Here we are. I mean,
has
like
fun.
the relationship that Disney has with this movie. So we've talked a little bit about, we probably could get away with just playing the whole movie in the background right now because
Hmm.
of how they seem to sort of refuse to like enforce any copyright stuff over this. However, somebody did mention earlier, I wish that they would make the animated characters free. So there, one of the really wild things about this is that Brer Rabbit, Brer Fox, and Brer Bear, they all appear in media from Disney as late as 2001 and maybe even
Hmm.
later. So they're perfectly fine with that, like using those
Yeah.
characters. It's just James Basket, it seems, that they have a real problem with.
And that's crazy. Like, doesn't that feel so rude to him?
That's
Like,
awful. That feels more racist than the movie.
it yeah, I can't help but feel a little bit like that when it's like, oh, we're fine with using every bit of this for dozens of years, like tens of years. And but then everything but James Baskett specifically. He's not a caricature. He's just a guy. He's just, he's
He's
just
like, well, if
a
you go and
likable
look up the
old guy.
Zip-a-dee-doo-dah like scene on YouTube, there's a bunch of scenes on YouTube where like people have uploaded them with "Is this racist?" as the
Hmm.
title. And if you go and look at the comments, you'll find tons of comments from people who are like, I am black and Uncle Remus was like, I used to imagine Uncle Remus was the grandfather I never got to know.
Hmm.
And a lot of people share that sentiment where it's just like he's just a kindly guy with some
Kindly old man,
worldly
yeah.
wisdom, and he's
Hmm.
sharing it, and he's
Yeah.
singing a great song
And a
at
good
the
storyteller, and
yeah.
like, who doesn't love a good storyteller?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it will. So Quantum Ranger Power says only 16 more years and it will be public domain. Yeah, and they have no plans to attempt to re re up that copyright. They're probably just going to let
Yeah.
it slide straight into
Well,
the public domain.
the books are already in the public domain. You can
Yes.
you can take those characters, but if you want to keep the designs of the characters for some sort of animated thing, that you got to wait a little longer. Zip-a-dee-doo-dah is one of those things you got to wait a little longer for. But yeah, the Uncle Remus stories are quite a bit older, so those are already public domain.
Yeah. You could do
It
your
would,
own Brer Rabbit movie right now if you really wanted to.
yeah, you could. I would watch that.
Me too.
Yeah, especially after watching this movie and like just the three little tales we get, I'm like, oh, these are good. I like these.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because let's talk about some of them because there's a general sort of arc to them in which he's dealing with Brer Fox and Brer Bear, who well, not at, the bear doesn't at first, but the fox wants to eat Brer Rabbit, as you might imagine. The tale starts with him getting caught in a rabbit trap, and then Brer Fox is running from a couple hills down the way to come catch him. And meanwhile, Brer Bear is stumbling through, who is very much the proto design of the bear from Jungle Book. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
they
Baloo.
clearly use that. Yeah, they clearly use that animation. There's a couple specific things where I'm like, oh, that's the exact dance he does in Jungle Book. I remember that. Um, he's sort of stumbling by, and he's kind of a dumb uh oaf of a creature, and he's like, hey man, I'll like, he sort of like uses his cunning and his cleverness to convince the bear to let him out of the trap, essentially. And then so he manages to you'll have to remind me of the finer details of exactly what he convinces him there, but
Oh,
he
well, so
convinces.
what happens is he gets caught, right?
Mhm.
He's leaving home. He's deciding to leave home, and he's, Uncle Remus is framing the story to relate a little bit closer to Johnny. So he's like, Brer Rabbit is leaving his home briar patch, and he's boarding it all up and going on his own way. He can take care of himself, kind of thing. And he's
Mhm.
hopping down the lane, and he gets caught in the trap. And
Oh, right. Let's rewind because the reason he tells Johnny this story is because Johnny is made up his mind to leave the farm and walk all the way back to Atlanta to go find his dad. And
yes,
so Uncle Remus is trying to tell him a story that's kind of a bit related to that about Brer Rabbit and him going off on his own and how he doesn't need nobody and whatever. And so he's telling him this story, A, because he sees that there's something in the kid of him. And so he's, it's relevant in that way. But also, he's telling him a story to keep him from leaving. He's going to tell him this story that kind of hooks him and makes him not want to leave right away.
yeah.
And so, like, he's being kind of clever and tricky in that way as well. So there's an obvious sort of thematic connection. Anyway, continue.
Well, and they've set that up well in that first, the opening scene as they're riding to the plantation house, where the father and Hattie McDaniel are all talking very fondly of Uncle Remus, and the kid is kind of
I'm
like,
so- I'm sorry to interrupt, but
No, go
Nick
for
says, "When does the KKK show up?" Like, here's the thing, they don't.
Yeah, funnily enough, not actually part of the movie. They cut that part from the book.
Anyway, continue.
Yeah, no. So they've set it up pretty well in the opening thing. The kid's desire to meet or to hear a story told by Uncle Remus is transferred well in that opening scene because the father and Hattie McDaniel speak very fondly of the stories that he used to tell when the father was a
Mhm.
child growing up on the plantation. So then when the kid is leaving to try to walk to Atlanta, he comes across Uncle Remus telling other children stories, and he hides in the bushes and listens because he's, this is who he's been waiting to meet
Yeah.
this whole time. So he kind of gets to
And
know.
it's a connection to his father.
Yes,
That's important
that
too.
is
Yeah.
important. So he hides in the bushes. Uncle Remus, comes out to him, asks what's going on. Everybody's kind of panicking because they can't find him. They can't find Johnny. And Uncle Remus, this was actually like one of my favorite deliveries in the movie. He was Hattie McDaniel comes in and starts asking Uncle Remus, "We can't find him. We don't know where he is. You got to help. Otherwise, Miss Sally's gonna, lose her mind with worry." And he goes, "Well, you tell her that he's with me." And she kind of like looks around like really skeptically and then gives him a little like squinting side eye and goes, "What do you mean he's with you?" It's like, and it's really funny. It's a
Yeah.
really funny delivery from a couple of really great actors playing off each other in this scene.
Mhm.
Another
Yeah.
reason why I think it's kind of shitty to completely toss the movie aside and
Yeah.
remove their contributions to the story and to film. But anyway, I digress. Uncle,
Before we get too far, Joe Danger in the chat says, "In the attempt to be anti-racist, they became racist." Many such cases.
yeah, well,
Many, many such cases. Continue.
yeah. So Uncle Remus covers for Johnny basically, and then it comes out and it's just like, "So what are you doing? Where are you going?" He says, "I'm going to Atlanta." He goes, "Oh, that's a long way to Atlanta, and after
Long walk.
long
Yeah.
walk. I guess I'll go with you. Like, dangerous to go alone. I guess I'll go with you, right?" And he's like, "Okay, well, sure." And he goes, "All right, you bring any food?" And the kid's like, "No." He's like, "Well, I mean, we're barely gonna make it off the plantation if we don't have any food. We should probably go get some cornbread from my house, right? Like, I've got
Hmm.
some. Yeah, we'll go back there." And so he takes him back to the house, and then he's just like packing everything up. And he goes, "Wow, it's a little late. We wouldn't even make it, by the time the sun rises. You're all the way over there. But I guess if you really want to go and you can't," he starts telling him a story, and then he stops telling him the story and goes like, "Well, I guess we should probably hit the road, right?" And the kid's like, "No, no, no, tell me about what happened. Tell me what it is." He's like,
Yeah.
"Oh, I don't know. You said you really wanted to leave. We probably should go
Hmm.
now." He's like, "No, no, you can tell me the story." And so he tricks him into staying for the night. Yeah. Then he brings him back home, and like this is when he tells the story of of getting caught in the rabbit trap. So Briar Rabbit is tending to leave out on his own. He doesn't really have a plan. He's just I'm gonna go do it. He gets caught along the way in a rabbit trap, and Brer Fox sees him and starts sharpening his axe because he's been trying to catch him forever. And so Brer Rabbit sees Brer Bear coming along the road and decides essentially to tell Brer Bear that hey, I'm getting paid to do this. I'm a scarecrow. I'm working as a scarecrow for
Hmm.
$1 a minute. And so
Yeah.
he's like, "You'd be a
$60
better."
an hour.
Yeah,
Someone
60.
mentioned it earlier. $60 an hour in 1870. Oh boy, yeah.
Yeah,
It's the inflation on that. That's a lot of money.
that's that's a salary. You can retire after a week. But he basically goes, "But you know what? You'd be better than I would. You're bigger and scarier. So why don't you take the job, and I'll just go on my way." And so it
And
becomes
Brer
like a
Bear's
race.
like, "What? Like, you're gonna give me the job? Oh, that's so nice of you."
Yeah, yeah. It's like it turns into a race against time to get the bear into the into the trap for him before the fox shows up to
Hmm.
kill him. And there's a nice tense little scene. But by the time the fox gets down there, the bear's in the trap instead, and the fox is like pretty pissed off about it. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh, but then, so before we continue, just because I looked it up and it's funny, $60 in 1870 is $1,445 today.
Jesus.
An hour? That's pretty good. I mean,
Yeah.
$60 an hour, as people have mentioned, is good now. Anyway, so that's quite the deal, and so obviously the bear's quite happy about it. So they trade places in the trap, and then the fox, because he's kind of clever in his own right. He convinces Brer Bear that like, oh, the rabbit, he fooled you, he tricked you, he made you look like a fool, and that makes Brer Bear quite angry.
Yes.
And so then now he's made two enemies instead of just one.
Yep. But he goes home and like he basically runs home and is like, yeah, maybe I shouldn't have left. Actually, I think it's probably better if I didn't. And
Yeah,
yeah, and that's where the story ends for that one.
yeah.
And then we have a little bit of development as Johnny makes friends with the other little boy who lives on the plantation, and he makes friends with the little girl who the
Mhm.
sister of the two poor
Well, yeah,
white.
we'll talk more about that at first, because at first, after he decides to stay, he sort of befriends that local black boy. Do you remember his name? You just said it, I think.
I don't I don't remember
He
his.
doesn't get a whole lot of screen time, but they're sort of doing childish games together. They're like he's kind of teaching him the lay of the land. Is at one point like they're like, oh, don't cut through this little field because that's where the bull lives, and like, yeah, you don't want to be downwind from the bull, so let's not go through there at all. And then they're getting up to antics like with the bullfrog and bringing it inside and all sorts of fun stuff like that. Fun childish games and stuff like that, having a good time. So there are white sharecroppers who live nearby as well, sort of poor white family. And there's two um oh, well, there's a really fun detail where the kid is forced to wear Johnny, the main kid, is forced to wear this oh
Yeah, it's
god,
like a lace
what's the word?
collar. It's a lace
Lace, thank you.
collar, yeah.
It's a lace collar in his like dress clothes, and he doesn't like it because he thinks it makes him look like a fruitcake. And so,
And he's right.
and he's right. And so he's like, he doesn't want to wear it, and he's forced to wear it. And then he's walking around, and he discovers two kids. Hold on a second. Hold on. Someone's at the door. You take over
No,
for a
he
second.
discovers these two kids being mean to some puppies, and this little girl who she's their sister, and she's not happy with how they're treating her puppy, and basically, they taunt him for looking like a little fruitcake in the in his lace collar, and he gets very upset and sad, downtrodden because he can't do nothing about it. But it's a really dramatic scene where the music builds up very tensely as he like sulks his way to a pond and then tears the lace collar off his neck and in a fit of rage starts like attacking it with a stick. But the little girl shows up and she's got the puppy with her, and she's like, "You can have the puppy if you want to. My brother's was gonna drown him." And he trades her the lace collar because she thinks it's pretty, because that's the thing, is like girls wear lace collars. And it's a interesting thing. I want to wait until Jamie gets back, but I think there's a scene in here before the lace collar bit where the mother and the grandmother are talking about what the boy needs in order to sort of grow up right, and the grandmother's basically saying like he needs friends, like he needs friends his own age. This might be a little bit later, but like Uncle Remus and friends his own age. He needs men in his life, basically, is what the grandmother's saying. And his mom goes, well, he's got
Yeah.
his mother. Why can't he just be fine with that? And that kind of translates to her dressing him in this lace collar that
Yeah.
boys don't really wear at the time, and everything like that. But he ends up
Especially
making out.
not in this area.
Yeah, not in
Yeah.
this area. But he ends up making out pretty good. He trades the lace collar to a little girl for a puppy, and
Mhm.
that's
That's a good deal.
it's a good deal. Yeah, I'm down. But
It's quite a cute scene where like he trades it to her, and she like has never owned anything that nice and that pretty before.
yeah,
And the way she plays that is actually pretty good. The child acting in this movie is like
It's
okay.
fine. It's fine. Yeah.
It's fine. It's not the best you'll ever see. There are some
We're not
strong
talking
moments.
Sixth Sense here. This is not.
No, and there's some moments where, Johnny's performance is a little like oof, but it's fine.
Yeah. Yeah, so the puppy was gonna get drowned by these bullies who were making fun of him for how gay he was dressed, and so he decides to take the puppy. And his mom, like, this is sort of where I kind of started getting into the whole or getting into feeling like the movie doesn't really set up exactly what she wants very well, or what her idea of what is good for him versus what
Mom, you mean?
what the movie's idea of what is good for him kind of come across, because he comes back with a puppy and she's just like, no, like, no, you can't have that, get that thing out of here, take it
Yeah.
back where it came from. And it's like, okay, but
Mhm.
like, why? And I think that really comes in because I don't know exactly why they're here, and we don't know who wanted them to be here. Really, was it the mom? Was it the dad? It's kind of unclear. Like, they kind of bring up that the dad knows Uncle Remus, but they also make it seem like the mom is very familiar with the plantation. So I'm not really sure
It's
what
just a
her.
little vague, but I
Yeah.
don't I don't know how much of that you need
No,
necessarily.
I don't
Like
know how much I need.
he
It just
brings
started to
he
bug me a
brings
little
in a
bit.
stray dog, and the mom's just like, no, maybe it's partly because it's not her house or whatever, but maybe she just doesn't like dogs and doesn't want to have to deal with pets or whatever.
Yeah, and
It's just like you brought him a stray dog, like, can we keep it? And she's like, no, no, go put it back wherever you got it.
yeah,
It's like not totally unbelievable she would. We don't get the scene of her saying that or why. We just kind of skip right past it.
yeah. Well, and I guess really what I'm getting at is that I just don't understand exactly what she wants for him
Hmm.
from this, and
Yeah, it's vague. All you really get is the general sense that she doesn't know what to do about his sort of rambunctious boy energy. You
yeah,
know, like she wants him basically to be like a nice girl in a sense. Like just to be sort of quiet and
demure.
demure. Yeah, honestly, like
Yeah,
that's the vibe. She doesn't really understand that he needs to go out and go and get into all this adventures and get into all this trouble and stuff like that, that's important for him, or that he's missing. She clearly doesn't recognize that there's something missing with the absence of his father that's really important in terms of masculine influence and things like that. So it's just sort of, I don't know, a lack of
yeah,
understanding
yeah.
of
It's just
boys.
like a vague, like she kind of just doesn't know how to raise him, sort of
Yeah, she
thing.
doesn't recognize the importance of shenanigans, as has been
Yeah,
mentioned in the chat.
yeah,
The
basically.
important, yeah.
He
Gotta
just
get
needs
us
to
all sorts
be
of
out getting into
shenanigans.
shenanigans with his puppy and his girlfriend and his little black
Yeah.
buddy. And you know what? That's fine.
They're a fun group. There's some fun stuff with them like running around and like the little black kids doing cartwheels and stuff like that. He just
Yeah.
looks like he's having a blast. Yeah, that is fun. So you went through the opening, like the first scene we get with those bullies, right? We got through that part.
Yeah, they're like they tease him for being a faggot, and then like he runs away, and in a fit
Hmm.
of rage he attacks his lace collar with a stick. Uh,
Yeah.
because
Yeah,
there's a
I
lot of
like that
impotent.
scene.
Yeah, no, it was very
It's good
dramatic.
stuff. The music. Okay, so the music, not just the songs, but the score is pretty good too. So, um, the kids are laughing at him, and they're doing the classic ha 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 kid laugh thing, and then the music picks up on that motif, and then the orchestra is like layering these instruments, all doing the na 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 da
Yeah,
da da, da.
yeah.
And it's like building an intensity like it's a horror movie. And it all like builds up to him throwing his lace collar on the ground. It's like it's pretty funny. It's just like that's how dramatic the moment is for this kid, you know. And I like that little moment. It's fun. Um, so yes, and the girl, obviously he has the puppy now, but he's not allowed to keep it in the house. And so then he goes to Uncle Remus and is like, "Hey, will you keep this puppy for me?" And Uncle Remus is like, "Absolutely not."
Yeah. No,
No.
I didn't. Absolutely not. I will not take that dog. Well, I mean, I guess it wouldn't be the worst thing.
I guess
It's
he
like,
is pretty cute.
Yeah.
Classic. That's very classic dad behavior as
Yes,
well.
absolutely. Dogs
Yeah.
are awful and I hate them. Now let me grab this one and have it sleep on my lap. Like
And he's like, "No, I'm not keeping him." And then right after that scene, we just get this little brief interlude where a bunch of the black sharecroppers are just walking from, I guess, one end of town to the other. I can't remember if they're going to or fro the fields. But there's a song they sing, like a sort of spiritual they sing as they're walking by, and it's just lovely.
yeah.
Sounds amazing. It's a really great song. I don't remember the words off the top of my head, but some of those like spirituals that find their way into the movie are really good too. There's another one they sing later, spoiler alert, when something bad happens to Johnny and there's a question about whether he's going to be okay or not. They all sort of gather outside and they're singing a song, a very obviously Christian hymn, and
Yeah.
it's a nice moment. It's a really nice moment. The music is really good. He likes choir in his movies, and so that stuff really adds a lot. Really adds a lot of texture to the movie. Um, so then there's the kids decide the bully kids come by and they're like, "Hey, give us back our dog," and they're like, "Well, Jenny gave it to me, and Jenny gave it to me because you didn't want it. So you guys were gonna drown it. So no, I'm not giving it back to you." And
Yeah.
Uncle Remus,
That
go ahead.
I was gonna say that's one thing where I like I kind of now I know why I guess that he doesn't say this, but I kind of wish that like we had got a scene of him at least be like they were gonna drown it. Like, what do you mean give
Yeah,
it back? They were gonna drown
yeah.
it.
Yeah,
Like,
there's a couple moments in the movie, and that's one of them where like the misunderstanding could be remedied pretty quickly by just explaining more and
like
doing better at using
explaining
your
it all.
words.
Just say the one thing that it's like,
Yeah,
no, this
yeah,
is the important part. They were gonna drown the dog. Do you want
yeah.
them to do that? It's like, well, I get
Yes,
yeah, like
I guess you're right. That's some of the worst stuff in the movie, I would say,
yeah,
and that's what I mean by some of the like poor execution because the central story is pretty strong, I would say.
yeah.
But there's stuff
Overall,
there's stuff like that where I'm just like, oh, you could have easily avoided any misunderstanding here by just using your words better, which is just classic mediocre writing stuff. Anyway, the kids are like, "Yeah, well, we're gonna go tell your mom, or the no, not your mom, the plantation owner. We're gonna go tell her that you stole our dog." And so they go run off to do that. And somewhere in here we get the next Brer Rabbit story, but I don't remember exactly where it is. Time to tell the next story, and is this the
this is yes, this is the one I so I when I was reading it last night before I had watched the movie, I sent you a picture of the second story in the book,
Mhm.
which is called The Wonderful Tar Baby Story, and my exact words were, "Hoo boy." Here we go. Um not as bad as I
Well,
expected
it
because it's
you
not
know, if you
yeah.
have the sort of very, very, very racist mind that Hugh does, you might think that that is a sort of an not nice way of describing a black person, but it's not that in the slightest.
No, it is not actually. It doesn't involve a black person at all. I'm kind of disappointed.
Yeah, yeah, that's the kind of that's the kind of thing you only think if you're as racist as Hugh
Yeah,
is.
exactly.
Um, no, but the story of the wonderful tar baby or whatever it's titled, um, Brer Fox has the clever idea of making a sort of a facsimile of a baby doll out of tar. That something is very, very sticky, so that when Brer Rabbit comes by, he'll get tricked into like touching it and getting stuck on it, and that's going to be his clever trap to finally outsmart and outwit Brer Rabbit, so we can kill him and eat him. So that's his plan, and so he's making a little. You can see it a bit in the trailer. He makes this. He sort of molds this tar into something vaguely baby doll shaped, and then there's some funny moments between him and the bear, where the bear is like, he doesn't really look like a baby, and so he like the fox rips the buttons off of the a bear's jacket to make eyes and stuff like that. Yeah,
He
fun,
breaks
fun,
his pipe
goofy
apart
antics.
to make a nose, and then it's like, well, he needs a hat, and so then they have a little fight over whose hat they're gonna take, whose hat are they gonna use to trick the rabbit, and it ends up being the bear's hat, and things almost go south for them because they're busy arguing, but they get it all together, and the rabbit is kind of just hopping around, saying hello to everybody. And when he hops by the tar baby, he goes to say hello, and it doesn't respond, and he gets very
Hmm.
offended.
Yeah. He's like, hey, why didn't you wave hello to me today when I
I
waved
waved
hello to you
hello to
today?
you today.
I was on a very large dose of horse tranquilizer. I wasn't waving hello to anybody,
Except
except to
maybe to a
maybe a
horse.
horse.
Yeah, he gets very offended at why the tar baby is not responding because he doesn't recognize that it is not actually not actually a black person. So like maybe there's the
Dude,
racism.
stop it. You're the horrible racist one. It's not the movie, it's the people watching. It's your
Yes,
fault.
it is.
Your
It is
fault,
me.
Jew.
No, it's me specifically, not all the
No, he
people.
gets
Just
offended. He gets offended that he doesn't wave hello to you today when he waves. He doesn't say hi back, and then he goes to like say like, "Hey, what's your deal, hon?" He touches him, and then he gets stuck. And then
well,
next
no,
thing you
he
know,
threatens him. He basically says like, I'm gonna bust you one in the jaw if you don't say hello to me right fucking now." And then he goes to punch him, and he gets stuck.
yeah, as you do. And then of course the fox is like, "Now's the chance. Now we got him." And so then,
Well, they let him get stuck further because he punches him
yes,
and kicks him a few more times, and then he gets all trapped up, and the fox comes sauntering out in like very very well done like arrogant fashion as he's walking towards him. Once his plan has succeeded, and him and the bear dance around. Super thrilled that they finally got him and that he seems like he has nowhere to go. There's no way for him to get out. And this is when Uncle Remus decides to stop telling the story for a little bit. He's like, oh, well, who knows how he got out.
he likes to do that to like keep the kids invested, to like beg them to keep going. It's fun. I like that sort of thing. There's a little bit of the sort of chaotic energy of Brer Rabbit in Uncle Remus as well, which is quite fun.
Yeah. Yep.
Quantum Ranger Power mentions
Oh,
cultural
yes.
historian Jason Spurb, which is a dumb name for a dumb person, describes the film as one of Hollywood's most resiliently offensive racist texts. That's insane. That's just actual insanity. Like you've never seen any movie with actual racism in it if you think this is one of the most resiliently offensive movies of all time. Like you've never watched movies.
Yeah.
You never experienced racism if you think this is like that offensive. And that it's crazy. It's crazy. Like
Yeah.
the worst you could say about this movie is that some people might laugh at the sort of over the top nature of the accents that the black characters have and might think that it's making fun of them even though it's clearly not intended to. Wow, the most resiliently offensive text of our generation. Wow. Or that like it presents a sort of relatively happy picture of one like, sharecropping plantation in 1870 when we all know that they were all just horribly awful. You know what I mean? Like that's
Well, how could they be
crazy
happy
talk.
at all? How would any of them ever have a good day in their lives? Ever? That's that. Yeah.
It drives me nuts. It drives me nuts. Fuck
Yeah.
you, Jason Spurb, you idiot.
Yeah. And
Oh,
Andrew,
real quick. Chief 8, thank you very much for the super
oh
chat. Says
yeah.
absolutely love the channel. Very glad to hear that. Thank you. We will endeavor to keep making stuff that you like.
Andrew
Thanks for.
Lindsay says
Mhm.
in the context of the anthropomorphic animated animals, I always just took it to be a facsimile of a Brer mole or badger or whatever. That actually makes sense. Yeah. Stop ruining my jokes, my racist jokes, with your logic.
But then he keeps telling the story, right? And um, how does he? I can't remember how he gets out of.
Oh,
Oh,
this
right,
is
right, right.
this is so it's like the second chapter of the book, right? So most of the
Yeah.
stories that they've told are the first, second, and I think almost like into the third or fourth chapter of the book. So they didn't get deep into the stories of Brer Rabbit.
You know, well, that tells me that they liked them enough. They're like, let's just do these.
Yeah, fuck it. These ones are pretty good. I don't think we need to look too much further. But basically, the fox is trying to come up with ways that he's going to, kill the rabbit. He's like, "Oh, I'm going to roast you over an open fire right now." and the rabbit sees a briar patch just off,
Well,
off to the
well,
left.
it's slightly more complicated than that because at first he's like, please don't do that, and he's like, oh yeah, it's like I was like, please don't skin me alive. He's like, well, then I'll skin you alive, and then he's like, oh. He sort of realizes that reverse psychology might work here a little bit. Like if he says like, "Oh, please don't do this thing," that he'll probably do it just to make him suffer. So he's like,
Yeah.
"Please don't throw me in that briar patch with all its like thorns and thicket
But
and all that sort of stuff."
it's even like more fun than that, right? Because he's like, I'm gonna roast you alive, right? It's like, okay, fine, you can do that, but just please don't throw me. Whatever you do, don't throw me in the briar patch. And he's like, oh, I
Hmm.
can't. I don't have. I can't really do the roasting here, so maybe I'll skin you alive. And he's just like, yeah, yeah, because like he hesitates for a little bit. He's like, yeah, that's fine. Go ahead, skin me all you want, but please don't throw me in the briar patch. He's like, okay, maybe I'll
Yeah.
hang you instead. He's like, okay, sure, yeah, but please, whatever you do. No briar patch. He's like, well, I guess I don't have a rope, so maybe I'll just throw you in the briar patch. He's like, no, please don't.
It's
And
like throws him in the briar patch, expecting it to like really hurt him, but he's kind of small and can kind of like not get caught in the thickets, or like it might be a little painful, but it's better than being skinned alive and all that sort of stuff. And he manages to escape. What you know. So that's more fun him being a trickster and finding ways to
But
outsmart.
like, and they throw him in there, right? And he feigns death, very similar to a Bugs Bunny type cartoon, right?
Yes.
And then he hops out, and he's just like, "I was born and raised in a briar patch, fuck you," and then hops away.
Fuck you, bitch! You'll never stop me. And so then he manages to get out and outsmarts them and to live another day. And so that's the second tale. Right after that, we go to a scene of him and his little black friend. They're sort of skipping along, singing one of the songs that Brer Rabbit was singing in the previous song. It's not Zip-a-dee-doo-dah. I don't remember which one it is. Um, but singing one of the very many catchy songs in this movie. And then the bully kids are like, "Hey, we're gonna beat you up if you don't give us that dog back," kind of thing. And then so he sort of Johnny uses the same sort of logic that Brer Rabbit does, where he just like is like, "Oh, whatever you do, don't go tell."
Well,
Um,
they say we're gonna go tell your mom. Yeah,
mhm,
go tell on you to your mom. And he goes, okay, that's fine. Yeah, go ahead and do that. But whatever you do, please don't tell your mom. That would
yeah,
be awful for me. And so
yeah,
they turn around and they go tell their mom. And he does this because the little girl has like they've come and threatened, like kind of threatened Uncle Remus a little bit, and they're stalking, they're harassing everybody. But the little girl has come to Johnny and revealed that their mom has said, well, if you gave him away, then they better just leave him alone. Like that's just how it's gonna be. Like I that's fine.
yeah,
He's your dog to do with as you will. And so like you traded him, and that's fine. And so she's like, and if they come back, or if they keep doing this, my mom says that she'll whoop them good, right? And
yeah,
so he tricks them into going and telling on themselves, and she whoops
mhm,
their asses, and it's
yeah,
pretty great, you know.
yeah.
Like,
There's probably one of the most straightforward examples of the like he's learning from these trickster tales how to deal with the bullies that are, causing him problems. And that's a nice little moment. It's like it's a good moment for Johnny, and it's one of the better moments, or one of the better sequences for establishing the merits of this frame story with Johnny. You know what I mean? It's like, that's fun. We're seeing how like the importance of trickster tales and how they can help kids and all that sort of stuff. It's great. So they get their asses beaten by their mother because Johnny outsmarted them. And then Hattie McDaniel's singing a nice little song about cooking, and Uncle Remus comes to visit her, and they kind of like they have like a playful antagonism between them, two of them. That's
yeah,
quite fun.
it was kind of funny. So somebody earlier in the chat brought up an idea called the Blackdell test, where two black characters have to talk together on screen about something that isn't a white person. And
Yeah,
funnily enough, this movie passes it because they talk about
yeah,
food.
yep. And the food looks good too.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Southern cooking owes a lot to to Black heritage as well. So
hmm
yeah,
So then the two bully kids come to complain to his mom, and of course the mom doesn't understand any of the full context. And this is another moment where Uncle Remus, if he just used his words a little better, he could solve this whole thing, but he doesn't. And so now the mom has this idea that Johnny is getting into trouble and stealing other kids' dogs and stuff like that. And so now he's really in trouble. And so she's like, don't tell him those folk tales no more. And he's like, okay, if you say so. And then she goes in, she talks to the grandmother, and she sees little Johnny playing a prank by stealing, I guess, a bone from Hattie McDaniel
yeah,
character.
yeah. Stealing a
He just,
bone for the dog.
hmm And so then she says, like, hey, you know, like you got a birthday coming up soon. Like, let's throw a party or whatever. And like, we'll bring all the kids. And he's like, can my dad come? And he's like, oh, we'll see. And he's like, oh, like, can I invite Jenny? Jenny is the poor girl, the sister of the two bullies. And then she goes like, well, you know, there's going to be so many other kids there already. And then the grandma steps in to be like, so that it won't matter if we add one more.
Yeah.
And that's a nice little moment as well.
Well, I like the moment where the grandma is just like, bitch, he needs friends. Like you
Yeah.
can't pick them all for him, basically.
Yes.
Like, why don't you just let? It's one of those things where he's like, the grandma is basically just like, why don't you just let him like live? And the mom
Yeah, and
is
be a
like,
kid.
yeah, be a kid. And the mom just for whatever reason doesn't have a good answer for why. Now I'm
Yeah.
sure that there's like a psychological need thing you could argue there, right? Like she doesn't quite understand
Mhm.
what she's doing herself, but it's like
Yeah.
I just me on a personal level, I just wish that the movie gave me a little more than just like the mom doesn't want it, because I'm like, hey, but like there's no good, she never presents a reason why she doesn't, right? And it's not like I
Yeah.
need that necessarily, but I want it. You know, I want a
Yeah.
little more.
Burgess Rex mentions classism. I was about to say that as well. We don't see,
We don't see
we're,
a
we're,
lot, yeah.
we're told that there was a party and that a bunch of kids were there for reasons that we'll get into. Johnny didn't, Johnny?
Yeah,
Yeah. He didn't,
Johnny and Jenny, which is
they didn't, that's not confusing at all. They didn't show up to the party. So we don't know if all the other kids invited were like his friends from Atlanta or whether they were other sort of poor kids from the area. But there's reason to believe that the mom doesn't want him hanging around with Jenny because she's one of the poor sharecroppers' kids. You know what I mean? So it could be a classism thing. It seems like it's probably a classism thing.
probably
That point would be made stronger if we saw the party and it was a bunch of other kids dressed up with like lace
lace
collars and
collars,
stuff
yeah,
like that. Yeah.
talking like Truman Capote,
Yeah.
sipping mint juleps.
Yeah. Uh, we don't put too fine a point on that, but that's the sort of implication. And then he goes to tell Uncle Remus, doesn't he? Like
He goes to give the bone to the dog at Uncle Remus's place, and Uncle Remus is
right.
has to kind of give him the whole like,
Your mom doesn't want me telling you those stories no more kind of
yeah,
thing. He hasn't been told yet that he can't see him anymore, but there's he sort of like has to give him the cold shoulder and tell him not to hang out here anymore, kind of thing. I guess so. He kind of actually no. We do see the party. I lied. We see the party, and they're all dressed up in very nice clothes.
yeah. So we do get a little bit of it, yeah.
Yeah. So it is a classism thing, among other things.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I must have blinked and missed the part where we get to see a bit of the party.
I think, yeah.
It looks like a nice party. The spread looks quite nice. I'm a big
Hattie
fan of
McDaniel was fucking cooking it. I'm sure it was.
Yeah.
She had a lot of time to perfect her southern her black mamie cooking kind of thing
Mhm.
between this and Gone with the Wind.
So Johnny shows up to Jenny's house and she's all dressed up. She's got the lace collar on and she's got the nicest outfit she has. And she's all thrilled to go to the party. And so they sort of walk off. And the two bully kids, who of course are not invited to the party, are quite unhappy about this. And so they follow him. And then they get into sort of, they're like teasing him and pushing them. And they end up pushing Jenny into the mud and ruining her nice clothes. Now, of course, this is very upsetting for Jenny, as you know, not hard to imagine why. And then as she starts crying, she's got mud all over her clothes. And then Johnny's like, I'm going to kick your ass. And he starts to. He does a pretty good job, honestly.
Johnny whoops that kid's ass. I'm like, get him, Johnny.
Yeah,
Knee him in
yeah,
the nads, go.
yeah. He gets some good blows in
Yeah,
for a kid. And then Uncle Remus shows up, breaks up the fight, tells the two bully kids to get the hell out of here. Johnny and Jenny go running off into the woods. Jenny's crying, obviously, because now she can't go to the party because her clothes are ruined. There's a funny little moment where Johnny's trying to be nice. He's like, "Look, I can get the dirt out. I can clean the clothes for you." And she's like, "You're making it worse."
yeah.
But so ultimately,
Oh, it's
it's
Ginny. It's Ginny, like
Ginny.
Virginia, like Ginny
Oh,
Weasley. Yeah, yeah,
the way they say it sounds
yeah.
like Jen.
It confused me. So
Very southern way of speaking too.
sweep
Sweep
the
the leg,
leg, Johnny.
Johnny.
Yeah, get him.
Oh, a quick note on this. I don't know exactly where they filmed it, but it definitely feels like southern United States, like probably in Georgia. I live in Georgia now. I didn't grow up here, but I live near Atlanta, and like you can really tell in like the very sort of vibrant red clay soil all over the place that this is actually filmed where it takes place, which is rare for it's kind of rare to see that nowadays.
Apparently, it was filmed in Phoenix, Arizona, and West Hollywood on a set.
Really?
Yeah,
Oh, on a set.
yeah.
These were all sets?
I think yeah, that's what it. This looks like what it says.
Oh, then they must have brought in a lot of the clay because I mean, unless I don't know, it looks very much like the dirt does down here. The trees maybe don't, if I'm looking at them right now, like look totally southern, but like, I don't know. I believed it when I was watching it. It wasn't quite clear where it took place, but I mean, where specifically it was in Georgia. But the clay is so vibrant. I thought it was Georgia clay.
Yeah,
Apparently, it's not.
that's
Wow,
interesting. Well, and another
impressive, I guess.
fun little note here, by the way, the cinematographer for this movie is the same guy who did Citizen Kane.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Damn. Did he also do Casablanca? Is that the same guy? Or is that someone else?
I don't think he did. It doesn't look like he did Casablanca. It's
Okay.
Greg Toland. No, he
Well,
did Grapes of Wrath, Best Years of Our Lives, Citizen Kane, Wuthering Heights, a lot of classics,
mhm.
actually. Yeah,
So either the either the clay in Phoenix is a very similar color, or they imported the dirt for the sake of the movie to give it that sort of
I mean,
iconic
either way,
Georgia
attention to
look. Either,
detail, very nice.
yeah, we like it. Good job. And so after they break up the fight, they eventually decide, well, our clothes are ruined. We can't go to the party. Like I tell you this, why don't I tell? He's trying to cheer up Ginny, not Jenny, and he's like, well, I'll tell you a story about Brer Rabbit. And he's like, okay, so one day Brer Rabbit went to a big party, and then Ginny starts crying, and it's like it's probably not the best story to tell right now, Johnny. Like that's a funny little moment, and it's kind of funny when he tries to tell the story to cheer someone up, but he's like not a great storyteller, and you know what I mean. Can't read the room super well. And then Uncle Remus shows up to be like, "Oh, well, don't worry about all that. Why don't I tell you a story?" So then he continues the story, or I guess this is a new story because it starts with Brer Rabbit being caught. Um, we don't mention how we get caught, I don't think. But he's caught and now he's in the den of Brer Fox and he's got them all tied up and he's getting ready to roast them alive. And it looks like things are very, very not good for Brer Rabbit. And I love the way he gets out of this. It's very sort of emblematic of the sort of chaotic trickster figure. So he's got him tied up and he's got him over the fire. And so his great idea for how to get out of this is to just start cackling like a madman, like he thinks it's the funniest thing that's ever happened. And that very much confuses Brer Fox, who's like, "What are you doing? Why are you laughing? This isn't funny." It's like, "Is this supposed to be? Why are you laughing?" And it throws him for a loop, and it distracts him, and he's just laughing and laughing and laughing and can't stop laughing. And then the laughter is contagious for Brer Bear, who's like, "What's so funny?" And then Brer Rabbit starts talking about how, like, "Oh no, I found my laughing place, and once I get to my laughing place, I can't stop laughing, ha 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 ha." And he keeps laughing and laughing, and then he convinces Brer Bear that the laughing place is a real place, and Brer Bear's like, "I want to go to the laughing place." And so Brer Fox is like, "No, like this is no, I'm going to eat him." And Brer Bear's like, "Shut up, Fox," and he like grabs him by the snout, and he's like, "I want to know where the laughing place is."
Yeah,
And so,
I want, because he's fed up at this point with Brer
yeah,
Fox's bullshit. He's taking his hat. He's like, then it's funny because like his Brer Bear's head is shaved, like
yeah, yeah,
there's hair missing from his ass and everything. He's been through the ringer,
continuity.
and he wants to go to the laughing place. Okay,
Hmm.
and yeah,
Yeah,
some I cannot pronounce that name. Is saying that it's like Odysseus and the Cyclops. Yeah, pretty much a little bit.
yeah.
Travel.
I quite like that as a sort of way because it seems like he's certainly about to die, and then he's like, "If I just start," he just starts cackling like a madman, and that throws the fox for a loop and distracts him long enough so that he can like improvise a plan to convince the bear to like free him from the situation so they can go to the laughing place. You know what I mean? But you can tell in the moment he's just laughing, because he doesn't know what else to do essentially, and then he kind of devises a plan out of it, kind of thing. I don't know. It's a really fun little moment. I really like these little stories. I like his clever way of manipulating his way out of
Yeah,
these
the
sticky
the
situations.
folktale like aspects. I mean, like I said, it feels very much like a Looney Tunes thing, like a Roadrunner, Wile E. Coyote, or a Bugs Bunny, more like, because clearly Brer Rabbit is the template for the Bugs Bunny character. But there's
Hmm.
just something really charming about it,
Yeah,
and
yeah, very charming.
yeah, and in particular, I mean, the way that the voices are done in this movie, and this is another reason why it really annoys me that they're like the main point, or appear to be the main point of contention. They've got very distinct characters
Yeah,
that just kind of like feel natural and
yeah,
compelling to me. And
yeah.
so like I'm just like, yeah, no, like I like it. I like it a lot. And this
It's
is
good.
another thing that we don't that doesn't get talked about, right? The Jim Crow, the Jim Crows from Dumbo. One of the reasons that people don't like that particular that set of characters is because they were voiced by white people, right?
Yeah.
They are not voiced by white people in this movie. They are voiced by
No,
other black voice actors. So like,
and it sounds like it.
yeah, and we are erasing like contributions from like essentially like some of the first black voice actors in, actually the first black voice actors in Disney, I would be almost willing to bet, right? Like this is
Yeah, I
it's a
can't
little
imagine there would
insane.
be. Yeah, I can't imagine there would have been any in any of the other ones we've talked about so far. So yeah.
Yeah. Everyone knows Song of the South is just Taxi Driver with Disney paint. Oh. Just imagine now.
It,
Okay,
I
just imagine Uncle Remus like, well, you know what a 44 Magnum does to a woman's pussy?
Now that you should see. Now that you should see. Wait, so which one's Bear Rabbit? Is that Robert De Niro?
Ooh, yeah, I guess so, right?
I guess so. I don't know who else it would be. Anyway, so he's tied up, but he's leading Brer Bear and Brer Fox to the laughing place. Now Brer Fox is obviously not convinced that the laughing place is real, but Brer Bear is, and so he's like, "Shut up, Fox. We're going to the laughing place." And then he basically tricks Brer Bear into like getting his nose stuck in a beehive. And then
But like he's
things take a
improvising, right? Because like he's
yeah.
leading them around, and then they're getting impatient, and he goes,
Hmm.
"No, no, no! See, it's right there, right?" And because he says
In that
that because
bush.
he sees beehive in there,
Yeah. Hmm.
and
Yeah,
Brer Bear,
exactly.
in his excitement, rushes headfirst into the bush. He comes out with the beehive on his nose. He's like, "Hey, there's no laughing place in here. There's only bees." It's like it's kind of a funny, just like a funny, charming little line. Like, there's
Yeah,
just a bunch of bees in here.
but he's not super angry about it until Brer Fox is laughing at him. He's like, "Oh my gosh, I've never seen anyone made a fool as much as you." He's like that's the most foolish thing I ever seen, and that makes Brer Bear very angry.
Yeah,
He's like because he has he doesn't like being made fun of or being played the fool. So then he shoves the beehive onto the fox's head in retaliation, and then the commotion with the bees allows him to escape essentially.
yeah, and he
It's
gets
good. It's
away.
fun.
Yeah,
He gets away. I love he's a sort of chaotic, clever little fellow, but I like how much of his actions are just improv essentially.
Yeah.
He's just like, shit, I gotta think quick. Gotta be quick on my feet, which is good for a rabbit character to be. It's good stuff. So then he tells them the story, and then they all go home. And then the mom is not happy about the fact that they were gone the whole time and missed the party that they took great pains to throw for his birthday. And then they show up and they're in dirty clothes or whatever. And there's a funny little moment where like clearly they're going to be in more trouble, but they sort of run off while she deals with Uncle Remus. And I like the Ginny like stops before she leaves to like curtsy and be like, "Nice to meet you."
Pleased to meet you.
Yeah. It's fun. And so then she has to have a talking with Uncle Remus, and she's like, and this is another example, and this is the worst stuff in the movie as far as I'm concerned, where Uncle Remus could explain what happened, but he just kind of doesn't. Now you can imagine he doesn't want to like be too disagreeable with her or argue with her because of her sort of position of power over him as not his boss, because Sally is his boss, but you know what I mean. Obviously there's a power dynamic there, but like you'd think he would use his words a bit more because she's not hostile towards him throughout the movie. She likes and respects him until until Johnny starts getting into trouble, and she thinks it's the result of these stories and Uncle Remus, but being a bad influence. But you know, you he could just explain what happened and everything would be fine, but he doesn't really speak up here. She just says like, "Well, I don't want you hanging around him anymore at all." Period, essentially. So it's like you're a bad influence on him, stay away from him. And of course that makes Uncle Remus pretty sad. And so then he gets his little Dark Night of the Soul scene where he's alone in his house and he's sort of coming to grips with the fact that like, you know, like are my stories good for people? Do they cause trouble? Am I worth anything more than my stories? You know, he's sort of thinking through all those things and voicing some of the doubts he has. And we already talked about this scene, but that line he says about how like, well, you know, they've never done anybody any harm, and if they haven't done anyone any good, then how have they lasted so long? Great little scene.
Yeah.
But then he makes up his mind, like, you know, I was gonna, you know, I've only ever known this place. I was going to whitewash these walls and make it all nice, but now, you know, maybe I won't. Maybe I'll just leave, essentially. And so he makes up his mind that it's time for him to go, and maybe he'll move on to Atlanta and start over there, kind of thing, because clearly no one wants him here. So he's kind of sad, and he, you know, feeling bad about it. So he sort of packs up his things to go.
Yeah. It's a good scene, man. I mean, like,
Yeah, that's a good thing.
he's the strongest of the live action actors in the movie for me. I think he's
for sure.
He's
It's not especially
not even
close. Yeah,
close.
he's the best one. I mean, Hattie McDaniel's good too, but she just doesn't have as much
She doesn't.
screen time.
Yeah, she doesn't get as much time.
Whitewashing the walls of racism. Yeah. So then Ginny returns home. Ginny returns home. And then Johnny's walking around, and then he's like, maybe I'll go say hi to Uncle Remus. And then he gets there, and Uncle Remus isn't at his cabin. And so he runs and he tells his mom that Uncle Remus is gone. And then his little black friend is like, there he goes. He's getting on that.
You're getting on the cart right now.
Yeah, but obviously Johnny doesn't want him to go, so he goes running after him. And in his panic and his desperation, he goes running across the field that has the bull in it. Oh no!
In a red suit. He's running in a red suit across the field that has the bull in it that he was warned about. And that was like when they cut to that wide shot. You'll see it in the trailers that's looping through. When they cut to that wide shot of the bull chasing after him, I was like, "Holy shit! That like
it's close.
That's actually like." Unnervingly close. Yeah, I'm actually kind of worried for this kid.
I'm wondering, looking at that shot, whether that's like a sort of what do you call it? Like it's comped in, whether it's two takes put together or not. Because I'm looking at it, like obviously you could do that nowadays. And obviously, they're putting in animation over top of live action stuff, and they're even putting animation in live action stuff at the end of the movie, which is a fun little twist. But if I'm looking at this shot, I could believe that this is actually the bull running across the field and the kid running across the field, and they sort of cut them together.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean,
I can't tell. Or there's a kid running across that field, and then right as they yell cut, they like someone swoops in and pulls the kid away.
the rodeo
And I'm not a
clown
yeah.
swoops in and like gets the bull's attention and everything. Georgius Rex is saying Ginny. It's short for Guinevere. That might be true.
I thought
Um,
it was
it's
okay.
probably Virginia though. Like
Yeah,
in southern United States, Virginia, it would be like
very
Ginny,
common.
Virginia. Yeah. I mean, I know a Ginny. Who's
Composite, yes,
now.
that's the word, a composite shot. I don't know if that's what they did or whether they just actually had a kid running away from a bull. Who knows? Dwarf stuntman, he didn't make it. Ugh, rest in peace.
R.I.P. Peter Dinklage the first.
Oh boy. So, and then, well, we don't see it on screen, but he
We hear a
gets
nice
hit
we
by
do
the
a nice
bull.
cut to like something else and the mom shrieks and the kid gets fucking clobbered by the bull.
Clobbered by the bull. And so now we're back at the plantation, and a number of the black sharecroppers and other sort of neighbors are sort of singing spirituals outside the home, just sort of somber, hoping that the kid is going to be okay. We see his little black friend there, and he looks awfully sad. We look up at the window, and we see that, he's not doing so hot, but he's
Yeah,
still alive.
he's
Some,
in a daze, and
Mhm.
he keeps calling for Uncle Remus in his sleep.
Yes. And so then his dad arrives and he's like, "What happened?" And the little kid tells him that he was hit by the bull. So obviously the dad is quite concerned about that. Uncle Remus shows up as well. And then the dad goes up. Uncle Remus stays outside. The dad goes up and he's like, "Hey, it's me. It's your dad." But all the kid keeps saying is, "Uncle Remus, come back, Uncle Remus." And so they go and they fetch Uncle Remus. They bring him up, and Uncle Remus starts telling him a story. And there's this nice little moment where the kid reaches out his hand to grab Uncle Remus, and then that sort of brings him out of it a little bit. It's a nice little moment. I like it. And it's kind of crazy to say that the movie is racist when we have this like very, I would think, deliberate image of the like, you know, the like, this
Yeah.
this scene in general that you would call the movie racist. Like, I don't think you're
The
paying
way that
attention at all.
that the characters, the black characters and the white characters talk to one another is
Mhm.
essentially on the level of equals. I mean, like,
Yeah,
there's no, I mean, apart from like maybe being like, well, the only reason that Uncle Remus maybe doesn't want to disagree with her is, which I do not believe this, right? But you could make the
no,
argument maybe that Uncle Remus doesn't want to disagree with the mother because he's afraid, of what the repercussions might be. I would say
maybe.
maybe more likely that he just doesn't think it's his place to get involved in how
Yeah,
she raises her kid, given the
yeah.
rest of the film. But I could
Mhm.
see if you wanted to read it the other way, that you could maybe make the argument, right?
Even then, she's not especially mean to him. She misunderstands the situation, but
Yeah.
she's not being like cruel or anything. And well, there's a great scene that Remus has with Sally, the grandmother who runs the plantation, where it's like obviously she's the boss, she's the employer, she's in charge and everything. But like, and they kind of have like they have a little bit of banter where they kind of make little jabs at each other. But like she's kind of like, there's a great moment where oh, God, I wish I could remember exactly what she says. Maybe you'll remember where he asks like, "Hey, are you mad at me?" And it's like, "Uncle Remus, of course I'm not mad at you," kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like they're nice to each other. Obviously, she's the boss and she acts like it. She's the lady of the house and everything. But like they just treat each other with respect, you know?
Yeah. It's wild that this I just don't get it. I really don't understand. Like it has to
Like
be.
what a critic would say is that like, that's like whitewashing history. Clearly that's never happened. And I have to be like, really? In this time period, really?
Really? I don't know.
Really?
I'm not super well read on the history of Reconstruction or the like ins and outs of that. Like I don't know that it's impossible for me to believe that this might exist
Here's
somewhere.
well, uh, like I've read quite a bit on this. I've been to a number of like sort of. I went to the Alabama History Museum in is it Montgomery or Birmingham? I can't remember now. It was actually a really, really good museum. And when you look at this era of history, especially in the South, one of the things you do realize is that Reconstruction was a better time for race relations. And then they regressed after that. There was a sort of resurgence that was like largely
Oh, really?
led and personified by the KKK as a backlash to it. They like really didn't like it, and then they pushed back, and things got worse again. You know what I mean? But like really, and like that, this showed up in the book I was reading. It's called Empire of Sin. It's about the history of New Orleans of the time, essentially. And that's one of the things it talks about too, that like race relations were actually getting better, and then they regress as a result of like the KKK and groups who felt especially resentful of the direction things were moving and the lack of their own sort of economic success. Like, black people and race mixing and all that was scapegoated as, as the cause of the problems they're facing. So and things got worse again. But that it definitely was a time that things were actually getting better. Not like now, obviously, not every place in Reconstruction era rural Georgia would have been like this. This is obviously a sort of like children's fairy tale sort of story, but it's not like unrealistic. It's just the more positive vision of it,
Yeah.
where like there was, they respected each other and were relatively decent to each other. You know what I mean? But like obviously there's still like, there's still class distinctions that came up. Obviously, like there's class separation between the white families as well in this. So it's like I don't get a lot of these criticisms. Certainly not that the movie itself is depicting anything in a racist way. The worst thing you can say is that it's kind of a rose-tinted view of this time period. But even then, I don't believe that anything here is like actually something that never happened. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, and largely based on the experiences that the author of the books had, where he,
Yeah.
he grew up on a plantation, learning these stories and hearing these stories from people who he respected, and people who he respected enough to want to come back years later and make sure that he wrote their stories down so that they wouldn't be lost
Yeah.
in a way that would be as authentic as possible to the stories that he was writing down. Like
Yeah, these stories were written firsthand by someone who grew up like on these plantations and respected these people. So like so now I'm meant to believe that no one ever had amicable relationships in this sort of setting at that time period. It's written by someone who literally did. You know what I mean? I don't know.
yeah, I mean, yeah. So to Quantum Ranger in the chat, considering there's no official way to watch it, I have to assume everybody is just going off the reputation and not actually watching it. I would assume that too. It's just like it's probably because they don't want to. But if you look for it, it's pretty easy to find. I mean, it's like
Yeah,
it's
easy to find.
it's free on the internet. Anybody could watch it.
Yeah,
It's
and so it like a lot of the criticisms at the time, like some of like the best criticism you could make, like what I just mentioned, that it was sort of like this is a little too wrote like a little too warm and cozy depiction of what things were like at the time, that it sort of like sands off some of the rough edges. Like that's probably the best case you could make, but some of the cases that were being made at the time, like on like people from the NAACP were like, this glorifies slavery. And it's like, oh, well, you didn't either watch or pay attention to this movie. So I don't care
or
what you have
yeah,
to
or
say
like
at
understand the
all.
source material, I guess. Like maybe
Clearly, you just didn't understand what was happening here because that's just factually incorrect. So, like, I'm going to throw your criticisms out into the trash. Thank you very much.
yeah. Is it
Is
any
this
more
any
warm
more?
and cozy?
No. Than your typical Disney fare? No, it is not.
No, no. It's
No.
pretty on par actually.
Wholesome and aspirational and um what would you say? Like I don't know. It's definitely a positive, optimistic vision of you know how people get along and how people live their lives and stuff like that. Obviously, there's a sort of maybe nostalgia for sort of like old school country living in the movie. You know what I mean? But that's
Yeah.
kind of separate from any notion of actual antebellum slavery or anything like that. Because that, like we mentioned at the beginning of the stream, none of that is even in the movie in the slightest. No one's ever going, "Oh, I'm so glad that we can still be here because slavery wasn't actually so bad after all." No one ever says that or anything like it. So
Oh,
that when
nobody
people act
ever
like,
even comes close to implying it. It's
no.
wild.
So when people talk about this movie like it's Birth of a Nation, it's just like you guys are insane. You guys are crazy. Either you didn't watch it and or you're lying about it. Um, I hope it's the former.
Yeah, I would hope so that you just haven't watched it, but like you know how this goes.
Yeah,
But anyway,
I don't
that's
know.
basically
But
where
yeah,
it
but
ends, right?
getting
Like he wakes up.
ba- yeah, well, Uncle Remus comes and he tells him the story, and then he like grabs his hand, and it's a nice tender moment. And then he wakes up and he's like, Uncle Remus, and then he realizes his dad's there, and his dad's like, it's like, oh, and he's, obviously he's happy to see his dad, but he's like, promise you'll stay with us, and the dad promises that he's actually going to stay, that he's not going anywhere, and that they're going to have a great time, and that he's coming to live here, and then he's not going to leave him again. Now, this is where I'm like, the movie's a little thin, like perhaps it's a little easy to solve that problem because we don't really get much on why the dad left originally and why he's okay with staying now,
Yeah,
except that clearly leaving his son, then finding out something horrible happened to him is enough for him to be like, maybe I shouldn't have left him. Like it's thin. I would like a little more to it. You know what I mean? Because it's fine as is, but I'd like more. I would say.
yeah, me too. It's this is the thinnest part is like the relationships between
Hmm.
the parents and Johnny. Really,
Yeah,
like that's the part of the movie that kind of feels like it needs a little more meat somewhere,
yeah.
But it's serviceable but not great.
Oren Albert asks, "Have you guys seen Birth of a Nation?" Though I have. Yeah,
Yeah, they
yeah,
show it in film school because it
yeah.
is they
It's an
make you
important
they
movie
it's a
in the
very
history of
important, yeah,
film.
one of the
It's
first
it's it's
blockbusters or the first blockbuster, right? It kind of
it's well
redefined.
crafted and it's not all bad, but there is the sort of finale of the movie being the KKK coming in to save the day.
Yeah,
So it's a little like, welp, that's not ideal, I would say.
difficult to argue for that one, I would
Yeah.
say.
That's also not the whole movie, so like, it's not that the whole thing is utterly worthless or anything like that. And I would encourage anyone interested in the movie to go watch it for themselves, but
Yeah,
like nothing in this comes anywhere close to that. So,
yeah, and the soundtrack here is phenomenal. So
it's true.
yeah,
It's
Georgius
true.
Rex. They show Birth of a Nation in film school, but Song of the South is beyond the pale. Yeah, that is true. That it like
I mean, yeah, it's certainly not one of the best crafted things ever, but yeah, I don't imagine they would have shown this in film school.
no.
Actually, yeah, I don't know.
I would know.
I
I
thought,
know a lot of people who are either have been to film school or are very intensely interested in film who kind of just seem to go along with the criticisms of this movie, and who like they don't think twice about not watching it. You know?
yeah, I think people assume this movie is essentially a minstrel show, and it's not.
No.
It's not in the slightest. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like
Again, doesn't come close.
if Uncle Remus was actually a white guy in blackface and the whole thing was making fun of him, maybe.
Yeah.
But like
It's very
that's a whole
reverent
different
for his
movie.
character. I mean, for his
Yeah,
character and his stories.
yeah, absolutely. It's a love letter to that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And for
yeah,
animation,
and
it
it
probably would be a very useful thing to learn or to
sure.
watch. Yeah.
I've said it before that I think it's really really a shame that this movie is sort of slowly being erased and forgotten to time, or and like perhaps more importantly that the Uncle Remus stories are being forgotten as well. It
Yeah.
seems, but I think there's a lot of good stuff here. It's not the best movie I've ever seen. Certainly,
No.
it's certainly not. It's not topping the list of Disney's movies in terms of how well executed and how well crafted it is, but it is good. I like it. I'd watch it again for sure.
Yeah.
Did they show Triumph of the Will? Lenny Riefenstahl is an important director. Yeah, we watched Triumph of the Will in film school,
Yeah,
or I did anyway.
I did.
Yeah, it's because it's interesting.
Yeah.
For many, many reasons. Yeah. So, like, I'm not opposed to people watching that sort of stuff. Go watch Birth of a Nation if you want. Just, it does have that aspect to it, which is
Yeah.
hard to ignore considering it's like basically the whole climax of the story.
Wasserman's asking a what show? So a minstrel show. Basically, white people doing exaggerated black performances, wearing dark black makeup and, essentially making fun of black people.
Yeah, singing stereotypical black folk songs in like shoe polish blackface with exaggerated lips and doing their hair all crazy and all that sort of stuff, for the sake of having a good time, sort of at the expense of black people and black culture by making fun of them. That's what a minstrel show is. Essentially, obviously, minstrel shows were more than that. They had other things, but that was often part of it. Because it's kind of a variety show, a minstrel show. So, like, for example, if you're watching White Christmas and they're singing a song about how they miss minstrel shows, there's no blackface in the movie. They're talking about the other aspects of minstrel shows, like silly jokes and gags and fun dances and stuff like that. But obviously, that was a big part of it. And so minstrelsy or minstrel shows is very much associated with blackface, which was, of course, very common at the time. And I think a lot of people who have not seen this movie hear that it's so controversial and so, what was the quote the one guy said, like enduringly racist and offensive, that they think that must be what this is. And it's not, and that's just wholly untrue. And I think that's a shame.
Yeah. Me too. Because I think there's a lot there's a lot of charm in this movie, and there's an important message about the importance of folktales that we've touched on here, right? And I think the trickster, the Brer Rabbit bits are the strongest part by far, and they're great. If the whole movie was that, it would probably be a top 10 Disney thing for me, just the way that
if they could find a good way of like tying them all together, which wouldn't be, they have a lot of the same characters, and they've sort of done that with the three stories here. The villains and the sort of antagonists of Brer Fox and Brer Bear are kind of constant, and it's just like little episodes of him almost getting caught and then getting away. If they could find a way of stitching that into a slightly stronger like through line narrative, that could be a top 10 Disney movie, I would say.
Yeah.
Because it is it's a little vignette-y, which is not bad.
It feels a little Looney Tunesy.
Well, yeah, obviously. Yep.
But I think that they could probably find a way to make that, work as an overall story. I mean, at the time, they probably could have, but
Oh, for sure. I mean, they did that quite a bit.
Yeah.
Like oftentimes the fairy tales they were adapting, they did a decent job of, especially true with Pinocchio, sort of like turning Pinocchio into a stronger, cohesive overall narrative, because it was kind of like a serialized thing, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was serialized in the Atlanta Constitution.
No, I'm talking about Pinocchio.
Oh, Pinocchio, yeah, it was.
Yeah, but like, so they had already had a track record of turning things that like were a little bit like little vignettes and little mini stories kind of loosely tied together. I mean, a lot of the Grimm's Brothers fairy tales are like that too. Sometimes you read one and the second half has barely anything to do with the first half, except that it's the same character. You know what I mean? And so a lot of times when they turned these into movies, they did a really good job of sort of making them one cohesive story, And they tended to adapt the ones that were already kind of like that, like Snow White, like Briar Rose, which becomes Sleeping Beauty, stuff like that. Anyway, so yeah, they definitely could have done that if they wanted to make a Brer Rabbit movie. I think that would have been stronger, but I do appreciate the sentiment on display here about the importance of fairy tales and how they affect children and why it's important to preserve this sort of thing. And, that stuff's all pretty good. So I'm happy this movie exists. I think it's a shame that it might be lost to history, and I hope that doesn't happen.
Well, at the very least, you can download it for free and
Yeah,
I think it's well
yeah,
worth having. You know.
yeah. At some point, I might, because the version I found on archive.org that I've been watching that I linked earlier in the chat is a decent transfer of it. It's not great.
No, it's
There
not
might,
great, but it's better than like trying to watch it in 480. You know.
yeah, yeah, that's for sure. And so maybe there is like the best version out there that I haven't quite found yet, but I encourage people to go watch it. It's a fun, charming movie. It's not nearly as offensive as people make it out to be. So,
Yeah,
yeah, good.
I would recommend it to I like and you know
Oh,
to
go ahead.
anybody basically. I would say definitely check it out and make up your own mind about it. I think
Yes,
you will have a difficult time agreeing with most of the criticisms if you actually go and watch it.
and
You
pay
know,
attention. Yeah,
yeah,
a lot of them are quite overblown, to say the very, very least. I
yeah.
wanted to. I
So
had
Andrew
a.
Lindsay, real
Okay.
quick, we did address this
Yep.
earlier, but it never made it to DVD or to VHS. It's never been fully released on home video or anything. It was a there are bits of it. The Zip-a-dee-doo-dah clip was released in 1986 on a sing-along video, and other than that, it never been released on home video. So the version that you can find, the best version I would say that you can find, which is not great, but it's still there on archive.com or .org. Sorry, is by a fan, someone, an enterprising individual who basically just took the old footage and did the work himself to upscale it and recreate it
Yeah.
as best he could. And
Yeah.
there are some flaws with it that you'll notice if you go and check it out. But he did a pretty solid job preserving it, and I would say I'm very grateful that he did.
A couple people have mentioned that they had it on VHS in the UK. That's interesting because that never happened here.
Yeah, when I was looking at it, actually, it says that it's not available. That's wild.
Mm, interesting. So before we go, I wanted to quickly add this to our rankings as we're going of this Disney arc. So currently this is my ranking. I think yours was ever so slightly different, but you'll have to remind me. So I have Pinocchio number 1, Snow White number 2, Dumbo 3, Bambi 4, Fantasia 1940, a distant 5.
Yeah, yeah. Mine,
Is
I
that
think
basic?
I had Snow White at the top, I think, but it's like a close
Okay.
1 and 2 between Snow White and Pinocchio.
So where would you put this?
Right now, I'd probably put this at like maybe 3, maybe 4. Like
For
there's
me, it's not as good as Dumbo, but I like it a bit more than I like the story a bit more than Bambi. Bambi's obviously a much more beautiful film
yeah, it's
in
tough
every
too
way.
because
Yeah,
it's hard to rate it like as an animated feature because I know they count it as an animated feature, but it's hard to rank it because it really isn't, and the animation, while the characters are great and the situations that they put them in are great, it's not as impressive as any of the others that they've done.
I
So
agree.
I would probably have it sitting in a rank of its own, but I do very much like the music is fantastic, and I really like the performance by James Baskett. I think he's
Hmm.
fantastic, and I would definitely watch it again before I rewatch Bambi. It would be my that would be my and probably before I rewatch Dumbo. Um,
I like Dumbo. Dumbo's good. I wouldn't. Yeah, I'd watch Dumbo first, but fair enough. Yeah, for me, I'm gonna put it after Dumbo. For the next one we do, we'll get like a little ranking we can put on screen. We'll make that happen for next time. I'm gonna put it after Dumbo, above Bambi, just for now at
yeah,
least. Just because I think the story resonates a bit stronger. Obviously, as mentioned before, Bambi is the superb aesthetic experience for sure, but story matters more than all the other stuff for me. So, Song of the South, better than people act like it is.
yeah,
That's for
that's for
damn
sure.
sure.
I did not realize that it only released in VHS in the UK. That's wild.
Wow.
Yeah, very cool.
Well, that's all. That's all I have.
Yeah, that's
Song of the South. Thanks for joining us for a chat about Song of the South. I hope you you can unclench your butt cheeks now. We
yeah.
made it. We talked about the horribly, horribly offensive movie that shall not be named, I guess. And we all survived. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for contributing in the chat. A lot of great stuff in the chat today, so really appreciate it. And thank you especially for the super chats. We really appreciate them. Next week, we will begin in earnest our attempt to cover all the remaining Best Picture nominees that we have not already talked about on stream.
Yeah.
The ones we have already covered on stream are, of course, Dune Part 2 and Emilia Perez. So if you want to know what we think of those, you can go back and watch those streams. We'll probably mention them.
Emilia Perez, you mean the eventual Best Picture winner, the clean sweep
of
2025, 13 for 13.
No way.
It's doing it. She's gonna come out there like Macho Man Randy Savage.
she's not winning.
I'm the best actress that's ever been.
I assume you're familiar with the controversial tweets.
What? No, I'm not. What controversial?
We'll talk about that. We'll talk about that more another time. But oh my gosh, people have discovered some tweets from the person who is nominated for Best Actress, and so there's no way in hell that they're winning now. No way in hell.
Now I'm kind of rooting for him or whatever.
Yeah, there's no. Well, I'll share them with you off stream, and we'll anyway. So, Dune Part 2, Emilia Perez, already been covered. So next week, so for the next 3 streams, we're going to be covering. We're going to do 3 one time, 3 another time, and then 2 another time. So next week we will be covering Anora, The Substance, and Conclave.
Yeah,
so,
I'm very excited for all 3 of these, actually.
Yeah, I think, these are might be among the best of the year. So I've the only one I haven't seen right now is Conclave, so I gotta watch that this week. If you would like to listen to us talk about those movies and not have them spoiled, you have until Sunday to watch those 3 movies. And so we'll see you then. Or that.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
Yeah, and then we'll let you know next time what the ones after that are, because we don't know.
Yeah, the streaming situations are going to be finicky, because I don't think any of the theaters near me are showing Wicked anymore, and there was talk about it coming to Peacock, but now because of the nomination, there's also talk that maybe it won't until March, and I'm a little worried about that. I really don't want to have to drag my ass halfway across the state to sit through that movie. So, like,
maybe if that happens, we'll find a way. If there's a will, there's a way. We'll make it happen. Anyway, thank you again for joining us. We'll see you next time for some Best Picture reviews, and enjoy the rest of your Sunday and have a zip-a-dee-doo-dah day. Yeah. Goodbye, friends.
Goodbye.
Toodaloo. Take care.